The gate of the Great Tower finally opened on the 100th floor. The higher one went up the tower, the more difficult it was, but the stronger one becomes whoever dared to venture into it. However, that didn't stop anyone. Millions of hunters died who were given to their goals of destroying the dragons and monsters that lived there. The loyal guild member who helped the rest of the hunters to overpower this hard way to the top of the tower turned out to be a hero to everyone. That name deserved to be on the honor board. However, as usual, no one was able to survive. Of all the hunters, only a few S-classes remained: Kim, Yeon, and one girl. Finally, on the top floor of the tower, its owner appeared. To all the hunters, he was a disgusting and slimy man who loved stealing corpses for his gruesome, macabre experiments. The mysterious man called out to the girl by a name she hated to hear. She grinned at him, but then huge worms came out of the ground, more suitable for dragons without wings. They were summoned by the owner of the tower, who wanted to crush all the hunters who still had blood in their veins. Of course, if the battle was lost, death awaited everyone. This motivated the girl to fight to the last. She bounced sideways away from the worm, which was about to grab her with its huge fangs. Swinging the sword from bottom to top, the girl cut the head and the entire torso of the worm into two parts. The remains of the monster sprinkled on the ground, pouring all around purple blood. The girl couldn't get any more expensive this whole cycle. She had no intention of dying, being reborn, and climbing to the top of the tower again in an attempt to defeat the unfortunate tower owner. The girl had been reborn for the 58th time. Now she had finally memorized the tower owner's entire sequence of attacks and was finally ready to accomplish it. They fought fiercely. The grim figure who owned a tower of incredible height tried to overpower the girl with fear. But in response, the girl masterfully used her magic lasso to neutralize the mutants. The girl memorized the order of the tower owner so well that she dreamed about it. She saw before her eyes an incredibly huge number of mutants, a beautiful glow of magic and scalding chains that held the most dangerous monsters. Finally, the girl concentrated and struck a decisive blow with her blade at the tower owner, shattering all the protective shackles and magical barriers protecting him from all outside attacks. Finally, the tower owner was overthrown. The mysterious girl had won the battle that had been going on for so long. In fact, the girl only now realized that all this time she had been inside the novel she had been writing for 4 years and 7 months to pass the civil service exam in South Korea. After finally passing it, the girl wanted to celebrate with a dinner at an institution, but on the way to it and died. As the girl reached the end of the novel she was now in, the reward caught up with her. And the reward was a new rebirth, in a new world, in which she will play the role of the infamous villain Renée Marquis, the daughter of the strongest warrior in the Empire, Duke Morgan Marquis. When she opened her eyes, the girl found herself in a dungeon. She immediately thought that it was time for her to return to her original world. The girl thought that her rebirth into a new novel was not planned. She thought that what was happening was the work of the owner of the tower, who somehow managed to move her from her original novel to a new one, in which it would be much harder for the girl to survive. This meant that the tower owner's last curse was so strong that it had managed to change the course of Renée's life. However, that didn't mean that the girl had to fold her arms. She saw no point in sitting and thinking of imprisonment. She needed to proceed to escape from the dungeon, singing only after that would she have a chance to get out of Renée Marquis' body. The girl decided to examine the girl's body, in which she found herself. She was wearing a beautiful dress. Diamond earrings dangled in her ears, and on her dainty feet flaunted the most beautiful shoes she had ever seen in her life. Renée was a real princess, but the only thing that pleased the girl was that the prisoners did not wear corsets. As soon as the girl thought that her abilities in her past life were better than in her present one, she put her thin hands around the thick bars of the cell and with a little effort pulled them apart. Now the girl realized that she really shouldn't have worried. And with her abilities, she could achieve a lot, even in that affair she knew absolutely nothing about. The Empire's greatest warrior, the cold-blooded Duke Marquisu, was the only duke in the Empire renowned for his exceptional swordsmanship. For centuries, his family had raised many swordsmen, but only now faced the imminent threat of falling. The only saint in the Empire and the Crown Prince's bride, Lyanna Caris, a lady from outside the Earl's family, has disappeared on the outskirts of the duchy. And the prime suspect turned out to be the disgrace of the Marquis family, the Empire's worst villain, abandoned by her family, Renee Marquis. Hearing a suspicious noise coming from behind the cell, a voice of a man was heard throughout the prison hall, shouting that an escape was taking place in the dungeon. Alan Marquis, heir to the house, ordered his men to prepare for battle. He realized that it was quite possible that an uneasy fighter had escaped from the cell. A sense of tension lingered in the air as he did so. Standing side by side with his brother was Duke Marquis's second son, Kian Marquis. They had conspired to attack the escapee on the count of 3. Each of the fighters had prepared their swords, hoping that he would escape from the dungeon alive. However, as soon as the boys saw the one coming out of the shadows with a thick iron bar, they changed their frowns to smiles. Renee smiled too, saying how many people had gathered to greet her. In the morning, Renee sat with her brothers at the common table in the castle. The eldest of the brothers, Alan, asked who had helped the girl get out of the dungeon. She replied that she had done it on her own. She assumed that the lack of guards had helped her. Though Renee tried to chat with her brothers, the only thought on her mind was how to regain her real life and get out of the affair in which she was imprisoned. However, Alan kept up with her. He kept asking for the name of the one who had such exceptional dexterity and was helping his sister get out of the prison cell. Alan did not understand why his sister would not answer the questions he asked so emotionally. His younger brother Kian replied that the girl did not listen to him at all. Despite this, Renee realized that her real task would be to improve her relationship with her so-called brothers. Renee said that she didn't quite understand the current situation. She decided to ask why everyone around her thought that she was the one who had killed Saint. Followed that question by hitting the table with her fist, knocking over a mug of tea. Alan shouted and said that Ren was the only one who kept talking about how she wanted to get rid of Lady Karis. And since she had disappeared from the duchy, Ren was suspected by the whole world from now on. Guy didn't stop and kept saying that no one knew if he would now succeed and restore the family honor that Renee had so successfully lost. On top of that, the girl had also managed to escape from prison. Kian tried to stop his brother, saying that if he didn't calm down and the girl got hurt, their father would immediately make everyone suffer. However, Alan didn't stop and kept pestering the girl with questions about how much longer she would try to dishonor the family's name. Finally, tired of listening to the constant reproaches, Renee said that she understood her brother. Suddenly, she asked if there was any proof that it was she who was involved in the disappearance of the saint and if the body had been found. Alan I answered her that she was the one who hid both the body and the evidence, and now she dared to act like she was not guilty of anything. Seeing his older brother starting to lose his temper, Kian decided to take charge of the situation. He confirmed the words that no evidence had been found that Renee was the one involved in Karis's disappearance. However, she was still the only suspect. Kian glanced at his brother and noticed that there was such a calmness here. Alan said in an undertone that jealousy of Karis was already a motive for murder. However, if it wasn't Renee, he could still kill such an innocent person. Alan finally said that not all was lost yet. He added that if the girl confessed and told where the body was, then His Highness the Crown Prince could forgive her, at least until the court session. The children's father had to go to the palace to defend the family's honor. Therefore, Alan said that if there was still any consciousness left to attach in Reyna, she had to confess her deeds and thus clear her face in front of the rest of the nobles. However, at this time, Early was not listening to her brother. She wondered why they were all talking about the Crown Prince and not the Emperor. Kian leaned over to Reyna and asked why there wasn't such a reaction. He said that it was the Crown Prince who was personally handling the case. However, Early didn't understand why the Crown Prince would travel such a distance. The reason was that the Crown Prince had already been betrothed to Lady Karis for 3 years. Alan told the girl to finally get rid of her illusions that she would have the opportunity to take her place. He added that we had the end of all this family nonsense, and Renee should be sick of this unrequited love by now. Finally, Renee realized what the plot was in the novel she was caught up in. She loved the Crown Prince so much that she had tried several times to kill his fiancée. And this time, she had succeeded. Everything was kind of obvious. However, what was wrong here? Renee rose from her chair and said that she now had an introduction to what was going on. She ordered her brothers to finally listen to her. She said that Liana could very well have escaped on her own. If there was no body, then it was not a murder, but a disappearance. Alan slapped his hand over his head. He ordered his sister to finally think with her head. Liana was supposed to be married in a month to the crown prince. No one could willingly disappear like that, knowing they could get a pass to a bright future. Renee really turned on her head. The fact that Liana was soon to be married elevated the fact that she ran away. Perhaps she ran away because she didn't want to get married. Alan asked if Saint looked like someone who could throw such a childish tantrum. The guy told Renee to stop comparing yourself to a brown girl. However, the girl only smiled in response and asked him how he could live with such a narrow mindset. She told him that with such a kind heart he couldn't go far. After these words, Alan was literally seething. However, his younger brother Kian was the opposite. The young lad was happy that your sis was finally giving a little auntie to his brother who had gotten so uptight. However, Renee wasn't going to stop. She decided to engage a little and added that the saint must have been in a lot of pain. Alan, despite his anger, asked what exactly Renee meant. The girl replied that he explained it to himself, saying that Saint was very kind. She must have run away because the crown prince wasn't so nice. The girl must have been too weak to refuse him by looking him in the face, so she just ran away. Seeing the expression on her brother's face change, Renee glowered. She was glad that her words had finally made a difference. Her snide expression was giving out. She finally asked, why didn't Alan stop by the crown prince and ask about it in person? And after saying that, Kian glowed along with Renee, who was simply delighted by her words. Renee looked at Kian and told him not to doubt her. After all, he was her brother. The girl turned to Alan and asked if he could believe her for once. However, Ant clenched his hands into a fist and asked if his sister was now trying to make them sympathize with her just because they were one family. Alan bowed his head and said that he would have gladly believed Renee if she had shown for once that they could be trusted. Their family had given her enough opportunities, time after time, hoping that she would one day come to her senses. However, the result was the same. Renee continued to sit back in her chair and replied that she believed that since there was nothing that could be done, her brothers just had to listen to her since the trial was only a month away. In that time, she was going to prove her innocence to them. Kian was very interested in his sister's words, and Alan asked her if she was really capable of it. He asked if she knew what she had to do. In response, Renee ordered him to shut his mouth and trust her for once. Renee smiled again in her acerbic smile and asked Alan if he was worried that she might have been right. Her older brother finally relented. He said that if the girl could prove her innocence, he would do everything in his power, even put his name on the line. Renee realized that her relationship with her brothers was beginning to improve. Kian was especially enthusiastic about how the girl was able to put her older brother in his place, who had become completely out of control and constantly capricious. Renee smiled and told Alan to take care of what he could sacrifice in advance because of his loss. However, the guy smiled and told his sister that it would be wise of her to prepare for defeat already now. Alan hadn't planned to shake hands, but he couldn't avoid this handshake. As an excellent swordsman, he could tell the difference between the hand of an ordinary person who knew nothing about wielding a sword. He felt nothing in the hand he held. No skill, no kindness. For a second, he almost unknowingly pulled the sword out of its sheath. He just extended his hand without knowing why. Renee bowed her head. She didn't know what to do now. She had so little information. Even if trying to start somewhere, she knew nothing. The girl decided to start with the fact that she should have gotten sources of information. There had to be someone friendly to her in this huge manor she was currently staying in. However, everyone she approached politely sent her away. She didn't understand how she had managed to survive so far with everyone treating her with such contempt. Besides, Renee could feel her relationship with others falling even when she just met a person. Finally, Renee decided to give up trying to get information from the manor. However, she had something to try, and boldly grabbed her arm. She ordered her to answer her question as to how she could get to her room, for the manor was very large. The maid, though grudgingly, answered Renee's question. The girl was able to pass her room, which she didn't expect to see. Compared to the treatment she received, the room was much better. The situation already seemed so bad to her. And the first thing the girl decided to do was to change her uncomfortable clothes. However, Her closet only contained dresses, summer hats, shoes, and gold costume jewelry that looked like candy wrappers. Renee assumed that her father, the Duke, was rich, but spending so much on these wrappers for noble women was reckless. With such a fortune, her father could easily buy any information. And in fact, it was quite easy for Renee to find admirers. A moment later, Renee was already staring at herself in the mirror. She realized that she had to proceed with caution. First and foremost, she had to make sure that Saint was really alive. There was no body, no evidence, and no witnesses. Saint could have escaped or been killed, but no one knew for sure. If she was alive, then Renee needed to confirm it. If she was dead, then the girl needed to catch the murderer and prove her innocence. And it needed to be gradual, and then she could get out of this world and back to her real one. Renee thought it was finally time to go. It seemed to her that she wouldn't get any information in the manor even with money. She was confident. Nothing was impossible for the S-rank hunter who had destroyed the owner of the tower and crushed it. Gathering her will in her fist, Renee decided to go to the place where Saint had disappeared. It seemed like a good idea, however. She didn't know where it was located. However, she couldn't stop. In this world she was in now, any nonsense could help the situation. Renee went to her older brother Alan's office. She began to demand that he give her a report on Saint's disappearance. She said that if someone didn't want the stigma of murder suspects to remain on the family, he was the one who had to help her. After these words, Alanya brought scratching his head in contemplation, but finally broke down and decided to give her the report. However, with the condition that there would be guards with Renee. Renee turned her head and saw several armed soldiers behind her. The girl, realizing how this could affect the situation, told Alan not to worry. However, Alan could not agree to these conditions. In that case, Renee proposed an idea. She wanted Alan's closest counselor to walk beside her. The girl said that the soldiers had to watch and report to her anyway. Wouldn't it be easier to send Alan's closest counselor with her? Renee, along with her new escort, came to a gloomy place. It was here that the Saint was last seen. That dark place was the outskirts of the Duchy of Marquis. According to the report, the Saint had disappeared 2 weeks ago while giving healing care in the slums. It was still unclear whether it was a disappearance or a kidnapping. Suddenly, Renee heard someone's male voice behind her back. The voice called out to her and asked what was going on. The owner of the voice was Priest Melson. He looked like he was doing something very pretentious. Renee replied that she had come to find the real culprit. She suggested that the priest cooperate. After saying this, several of the priest's assistants began chatting amongst themselves about whether or not they had said that she was the one to blame for the murder. The priest asked the girl if she had thus stated that someone else was to blame for Saint's disappearance. Renee, however, replied that it was not a statement, but a fact, because she had never killed anyone. The girl added that no one alive today had proof or witnesses that she was the one to blame. Since no one was capable of finding the Saint, it was unlikely that anyone could succeed in the case besides her. Renee said she hoped the priest understood that she wanted to cooperate for the common good. Several of the priest's assistants standing behind him said that the young lady was correct in what she said. However, the priest himself emotionally questioned how he could believe in Renee's innocence when she in turn was the only suspect. The priest's words amused the girl a little, and it appeared that from the looks of it, the priest was no friend with language. The girl said that if Melson didn't trust her sincerity, she had brought a gift for his church. And the gift itself was Renee's collection of bling of all sorts, which she was happy to donate. Priest Melson's eyes shone as soon as he looked at the small chest containing the girl's most precious rings, stones, and necklace. The man immediately scratched his mustache and apologized to Renee for not seeing her true feelings of regret. He immediately asked if there was anything he could do to help her. The girl replied, "There was some of Liana's things, and the more the better." The priest handed the girl a small prayer book, saying it was the only thing that belonged to the saint. Renee took it in her hands and felt it reek of sacredness. The priest leaned over to her and asked if there was anything else needed. As Renee expected, the more money he had in his hands, the quicker and kinder he was. Renee said she would like to inspect the tent where Liana was staying. She asked the priest if he knew where it was located. After the girl's question, Melson led her to the tent, inside of which everything was clean and modest. The girl assumed that this reflected that Liana was a saint. The girl was approached by the assistant Alan. He started to ask her about the donation, but Renee quickly interrupted him that she couldn't get that prayer book without it. However, the man said that wasn't the point. It seemed to him that she hated the church, because something similar had happened to the archbishop. Renee was interested in the story about the archbishop. She wanted to ask about him, but her assistant said that the girl must not have wanted to talk about it anymore. But Renee said to keep going here. She added that she had done so much that she couldn't remember what happened anymore. The aide said that when the archbishop declared Lady Caris a saint, on that occasion, the young lady splashed champagne in the archbishop's face. At this, Renee ordered the man to stop. She smiled and realized what a busy life the girl had in the body she found herself in. The aide reminded the girl of her words that it wasn't fair. The archbishop, on the other hand, said that Renee had committed an unforgivable act. And finally, the girl realized what had happened. But people still did not believe it, and the archbishop's actions were in vain. The girl was also asked by her assistant if it was really a misunderstanding. Renee, on the other hand, answered him to think what he wanted. Now no one heard those who had a bad reputation. Renee turned to her assistant and told him to go outside and wait until she was looking at everything. The mustachioed man with glasses graciously agreed, and with a small smile on his face left the tent. In Renee's past life, even in countless rebirths, there was something that she had experienced several times. Besides that, you will experience and in the future. However, in this case, facts were useless. The truth was what everyone wanted to hear, because what they didn't want to hear was a lie. Renee realized that no one could be trusted, and since the dinner girl was caught up in the affair, she was the real Renee. Renee wondered if there was anyone in this world she could trust like herself. No matter how much she was suspected and falsely accused, she would still believe in herself, the true Renee. And even if she was really bad, then that's what she should be. The girl had promised herself that she, Renee Marquis, would never doubt herself again. Now she had to find someone who had to believe in her innocence and her words. It was the only way to survive and justify herself. The same assistants that stood next to the priest asked his commas whether the Duke Marquis's daughter had really come to visit. The mustachioed man confirmed these words. He repeated her words that she wanted to personally investigate and prove her non-participation in the disappearance of everyone's favorite saint. A few hours after Renee's arrival, the priest had a conversation with some black-haired guy in Elatz. In truth, Melson would never have thought that His Majesty's Crown Prince would send this man for a conversation. This guy was Cedric Ansarad, the man who was dubbed the Mercenary King in his 20s. He was the head of the Shira Guild, the best mercenary guild on the continent, one of the best swordmasters of the Empire. The guy had many titles and was nicknamed the Light of the Empire. The priest circled Cedric with his gaze. He still didn't understand how such a person could be capable of solving a case like this. Finally, Cedric asked Melson if he really thought Renee was just going to prove her innocence. The priest replied that he didn't quite believe that, but he thought he wanted a very strong backlash if he didn't at least let her try. Cedric started to think about the fact that the priest must have just been bribed. It didn't seem surprising to him. More surprising was that Renee had come all this way to personally investigate. It seemed to the boy that the girl was indeed very impatient. Cedric had heard rumors about Renee. She had once cut off Viscountess Kenzie's hair, stolen medicine from behind the Crown Prince's carriage, and said she would take care of him, and even tripped the Holy Comma, causing it to fall. Of course, there were inaccuracies in all of this, but they didn't concern Cedric in any way. Cedric turned to the priest and asked him to refrain from giving out any information earlier. In particular, he needed to hide the fact that there were witnesses. The guy offered the priest to meet with the Duke's daughter, which the priest was very much not happy about, but only he wanted to say something, as he collapsed head on the table unconscious. From surprise, Cedric was about to take his sword out of its sheath. Cedric started to think that the priest was poisoned, but some mysterious voice that was seen in the form of a horned silhouette told him that the priest fainted for no reason. There was not even a trace of magic. Guy immediately snatched his sword from its sheath. He realized that the priest was affected by the energy of the dream demon. Even Cedric, the swordmaster, could barely resist it. It was definitely a power comparable to a high-ranking demon. The guy didn't understand who could even be capable of summoning a demon of that level, plus, together, where there were so many priests. In a world where everything was so uncertain and unstable, there was only one thing that kept Cedric going. Something that helped a child orphaned by war survive. That thing was strength. Just as people believed in goodness, he believed only in strength. Even if Cedric had managed to create the largest mercenary guild on the continent and become their king, even if he had been given power and money, the thirst for power would not leave him. He felt as if he were looking at the sun from the bottom of a well and trying unsuccessfully to reach it. The only thing that could quench Cedric's thirst was the power of the Crown Prince, the strongest man on the continent. But the longer the thirst lasted, the more Cedric felt the emptiness in everything. Cedric looked around the abode of the priests, where everyone around him had fallen into slumber. A sleep demon alone could not do such a thing. The boy felt that the strongest energy was in the distance, where the tents were slowly beginning to end. It was in that direction that the saint's tent was. Cedric started to slowly make his way to the tent, but suddenly he felt someone's huge, gloomy gaze on him, saturated with vile and debilitating energy. That gaze made Cedric feel cold sweat running down his cheeks. Cedric turned around sharply with his sword drawn, but there was no one behind him. It seemed very strange to the boy. He felt as if the energy limit together had already been exceeded. He had never felt such a thing. It was beyond human comprehension, as if it was like a natural disaster. Cedric didn't even dare to compare the energy going on with the Crown Prince's power. The culprit behind it all was someone no one dared to harm, and Cedric couldn't afford to miss such a great opportunity to finally quench his thirst. He lit up with the idea of finding out who it was. Cedric's accomplishment was not his goal. The satisfaction only came from getting stronger. He was literally obsessed with the idea. But once he gained strength and rushed to the search, he collapsed to the ground, unable to withstand such a huge concentration of demonic energy in one place. Renee walked over to Cedric, who was lying on the floor. She crouched down on her knees to see if he was okay. Outwardly, she liked him, so much so that she wondered what had happened to this kitten. A little earlier, Renee was sitting in the saint's tent. She was looking at the prayer book she had gotten from the priest in her hands. She kept wondering if she could find the saint using it. After analyzing the situation, the girl realized that deciphering the prayer book would take about 24 hours, so she decided to use one of her abilities and summon dream demons here, which would force the other priests to stay out of her way. Currently, Renee was already sitting over Cedric, who was still unconscious. The girl carefully dragged him over to the bed, onto the soft pillow and mattress, and covered him with a blanket. Renee couldn't get enough of him. Cedric turned out to be very handsome and reminded her a little of her cute neighbor's cat Cherniche from a past life. Renee bent closer and gently, with 2 fingers opened Cedric's eyes. There was something special in his gaze that caught her attention. Renee understood why the demon had been so difficult before putting the boy to sleep. Introduced Cedric was indeed renowned for his swordsmanship, intelligence, and wisdom. For a brief moment, the thought of killing the lad flashed through Renee's mind, but she quickly got rid of it. She wanted to keep Cedric alive as she really liked him. He was the first one she wasn't familiar with. The girl wanted to get close to him. From the looks of it, was not the type of person to judge someone based on hearsay. Judging from his titles, he must have held a lot of information. Since he was a swordmaster, she didn't have to worry about him falling and dying. So Renee finally decided that Cedric wouldn't be only hers from now on. Using her powers, Renee touched Cedric's arm and viewed his dreams, which changed the recent events a bit. She saw Cedric talking to a priest who blabbed about there being a witness. The fact that hiding the witness was the Crown Prince and Cedric's orders pissed her off even more. Glancing at Cedric, Renee saw that she had not intentionally punched him in the face, nor had she broken his nose on purpose. Feeling guilty, Renee used her healing ability to fix the mistake she had unintentionally made. She smiled and looked at the boy, who seemed incredibly beautiful, and slowly walked away, promising herself that she would see him again. Cedric was in his dream. He heard a voice calling him Blackie and ordering him to get up, as it was time to punish him for having angered his master. The lad, however, did not realize what was happening to him. However, he was aware of the fact that he was in his own dream, in which he had been plunged by the dream demon himself. The voice kept telling the boy that he was his master from this day forward, and if Cedric couldn't wake up, he would gladly punish him. Finally, Cedric woke up and immediately felt a pain in his nose. Cedric jerked up out of bed. It hit him. He wondered what had happened to his energy. But as soon as he was briefly distracted, he found Renee beside him, asking if he was finally awake. Renee approached the guy and assumed he already knew her. She asked under what circumstances they might have met before. The guy replied that he had never seen her before. Inside him was a completely different impression from what he had heard about the girl. She seemed quite pretty to him as well. Noticing how close Renee came to him, Cedric asked her to step back a bit, but the girl took his hand and he immediately felt the sensation. When she placed her palm, he immediately realized that he was the one who was looking for her. She had summoned a high-rank demon. Renee was a little disappointed, though she smiled. She had hoped that Cedric was very wise, but in fact he was showing average, but as stupid. She asked the guy if he had carried out the Crown Prince's orders, addressing him by the name Blackie. The girl asked Cedric if there were actually witnesses and why the guy didn't say so. Tried to deny it, and said he had no idea than he had said earlier, but she moved even closer to him and asked him not to waste their time together. She said that she had just met the man in person and had heard about everything. What bothered Renee the most was that Cedric and the Crown Prince had covered everything up and pretended not to be aware of what had really happened. The saint had not been kidnapped or killed, she had left on her own. And that meant there was absolutely no reason to keep Renee in the dungeon. Cedric, feeling Renee's pressure on himself, said that the Crown Prince believed that the reason Saint had disappeared was because Renee had threatened her. The girl rejoiced at this news. She told Cedric that Here was far more obedient than she had realized. However, she did not think he was frightened. She said early on, since it happened, the assumption was reasonable. However, it wasn't true. Cedric replied that the Crown Prince must have thought otherwise, for the new bride had disappeared just before the wedding, and in such a situation, hiding the only witness was strange. Either he had lost trust in everyone after the disappearance of his bride, or the reputation of not eating was also important to him. The information given was very different from the rumors. Cedric said he had heard that Renee had been in love with the prince's crone for a long time, but listening to her, it rather seemed that she hated him. And the girl replied to this that she really didn't like the prince anymore, and she really began to harbor hateful feelings for him. The girl asked Cedric why on earth should she like the man who had taken her into custody. It turned out to be just disgusting to her. Cedric agreed with these words, but added that he had something to tell her. The Crown Prince and Saint were known as the couple of the century, but in reality, it was different. Their engagement was nothing more than a mere business relationship. The engagement happened only because it was necessary. They did not love each other. Renee slapped her hand on the bed in excitement. She guessed that was what had happened, but suddenly her fervor cooled. She stopped talking for a moment and asked why Cedric had told her all of this. The boy only smiled in response. Renee realized that whatever it was, if it was true, it all fit together. It was an engagement out of necessity. The Crown Prince must have wanted to eliminate any circumstances in which he could be suspected of kidnapping and killing his fiancée. He had a lump in his throat, so he got rid of it. The girl exhaled. Since she had figured out everything she needed, it was time for her to hit the road. But Cedric held her up, asking if she was a demon by any chance. Renee stopped and came to a slight bewilderment. She said quite seriously that she was a human. But to this, Cedric asked another question. How did she achieve such a power of energy? The power the girl possessed was of unbelievable proportions. Such energy, no matter how you looked at it, could not be possessed by a human. It was not just powerful, but a very dark force, as if it held an old grudge. Cedric finally asked the girl how such a mortal lady got such incredible power. With a small smile on her face, the girl replied that all one had to do was die 58 times, or else try to save the world. These words discouraged Cedric even more, as he had heard that people had never held a sword before. The guy realized that with such strength, the girl could help the Empire unite an entire continent. Suddenly, Cedric stated that the girl was absolutely following the path of the sword. However, Renee actually just wanted to get home there. The guy grabbed the girl by the knee and quite sincerely said that he would serve her as his teacher. Cedric Ansarad was a man who had so many accomplishments that he became known as the Light of the Empire. He received both hatred and admiration because he was simply a man of unknown origins. The only thing he was interested in was the way of the sword. Cedric was not moved by scornful or, on the contrary, admiring looks, but by the desire to push his limits. But even the crown prince, who was considered the strongest in the empire, was not enough for him. Cedric was crushed by boredom. When he lost his purpose, nothing interested him. But one day he saw a light that illuminated his forgotten ambition. That light was Renee Marquis. And so Cedric wholeheartedly asked for the girl's strength to teach him what she knew herself. Renee scratched her head. She could barely believe that the mercenary king himself wanted her to be his teacher. Renee had never done anything like this before, let alone take on apprentices. No matter how long it took, the outcome would still be the same. She understood that it was hard to live alone, but she didn't like taking responsibility for others. Upon reflection, Renee said no decisively. Remorse and sadness appeared on Cedric's face. He spoke in a trembling voice and asked the girl if she liked him. But Renee answered that she liked them a lot, but she just didn't like to take responsibility for others. The girl was about to leave, waving her hand, but Cedric tried to hold her back, trying to say something. Renee wanted to leave, but she saw how cute Cedric was looking at her. So she couldn't help but be curious as to what she thought the most beautiful guy in the world wanted to say to her. Cedric said he was struggling right now. Even after training hard when meeting the crown prince, who was considered the strongest man on the continent, he felt nothing. But when he saw Renee training, something awakened. Cedric's eyes glittered even more. He tried his best to get the girl to teach him. To Renee, it was an incredible compliment. The guy went on to say that it was the first time she felt so eager to compete with someone. Renee bowed her head and thanked him for his warm words. Cedric replied that he wouldn't insist on his own, but if she decided to take him on as an apprentice early on, he would help her financially and morally. He promised to give her anything she wished. He would do anything she ordered. Upon reflection, Renee realized that lookalike was the perfect and candidate for the sources of information she so desperately needed. In the end, she decided that she was accepting Cedric as her apprentice. However, he had to know if it was something that had survived only because of his looks. Cedric got up from the bed and put his hand over his heart. He thanked his new teacher from the bottom of his heart and soul. The girl immediately ordered him to call her by her first name like before. A few minutes later, Cedric was already conversing with Renee in the same room. On the table was a basket of baked goods that Sir Martin, that mustachioed little man, Alan's assistant, had brought. Renee recalled Cedric's words that he had promised to help her morally and financially. In that case, he was to answer one question she had wanted to ask for a long time. The boy had agreed too, which made the girl a little nervous. Cedric was so malleable that it was even somehow uncomfortable. Renee was interested in the crown prince and saint. She said that if Cedric knew anything about the two of them, he should have detailed it as well. And since he was following the crown prince's orders, he should have been able to easily answer that question. Cedric hadn't even sworn allegiance to his crown prince, so he wasn't going to hide anything from his magnificent teacher. However, with these added that before he told her, he advised her not to start a feud with the crown prince, because he had incredible political power. Renee stroked Cedric's head and thanked him for worrying about her. The guy actually turned out to be very nice to her, so she told him not to worry about her and just answer the question. Told Renee exactly what she was guessing. The saint, Liana Karis, had received the favor of Balua and was considered an incarnation of God. Due to her strength and character, she was beloved by everyone in the empire. After being engaged to the saint, the crown prince gained a lot of support from the people of the empire. Every effort was also made to keep the engagement between the crown prince and saint. It was just like Ron Prince was not at all opposed to bloodshed to extinguish the slightest spark. However, under the reverend circumstances, there was the disappearance of Saint. In addition, there was the testimony of a witness who personally saw Saint disappear. Renee said no matter how much she thought about the Illuminator story, one thought kept her going. The last witness, A junior priest ministered to the saint who was struggling with something. Perhaps it had been a revelation. There was also the fact that the saint had said in a dream that she needed to leave. After its demolition, this disappeared while the priest slept, so he reported it to the crown prince. However, what could have been so dangerous that she escaped in the night? This was what Renee thought about. If Liana became a saint, couldn't she protect herself with holy power? Look said, if the bride ran away right before the wedding with the words that it was dangerous, people might start looking at the groom. Besides, the prince was concerned about this situation. Besides, there were also the prince's crown rivals who were trying to squash him like a flea. The princess favored by the emperor and the nobles, Iris von Ramdisch, was actually the crown prince's only rival and political opponent. And at the moment, there were only 2 members of the imperial family left, not counting the emperor himself. Cedric was surprised that Renee did not know this. However, the girl replied that those were the reasons. In her mind, she was proud that she had been reborn so many times in the Hunter novel and then moved into the romance novel. Renee added that it was rather awkward. To rule out the murder option, she had to find Saint and show that she was alive, but it would be rather odd to bring her back to where she said she was dangerous. The girl thought it was too much. Look noticed how the expression on the girl's face changed. He leaned over to comfort her, but she closed his doom eyes and told him she wasn't as good as she appeared to him. But the guy said he didn't know how the rumors could have been so false. He promised to go right now and set things right. But the girl politely told him to sit tight. Besides, the girl was here to prove her innocence. She now realized that maybe it was about the crown prince, so she thought she should have settled that issue first. However, come to that, he didn't quite understand exactly how she wanted it resolved. He kissed the girl's hand and asked if she could teach him that. Renee was already slowly beginning to doubt and regret her choice. However, the girl was obsessed with the idea of both meeting the crown prince and talking to him. However, Cedric did not stop convincing her that he simply would not listen to her. In response to these words, Renee rubbed Cedric's nose and said that she preferred physical communication to words. The girl wanted to use force. The boy was both making that decision and knew that the crown prince was no match for Renee. If Renee wanted to talk, she needed to meet with the crown prince first, but just like Cedric said, the crown prince would absolutely ignore her words and any meetings. However, if one were to invade the imperial family, things were going to become more problematic. However, Renee needed to be in the midst of going after the man who accused her of committing a crime without any evidence. Renee asked Cedric if he knew how it was possible to get to the man who never left home. The guy didn't know the answer to that question, so Renee quickly enlightened him. It was the easiest thing to do since Renee's plan was to decide to set his house on fire. Renee and Cedric were riding in the same carriage. The guy wanted to ask the girl a question, but asked her permission first. Renee smiled and said that she would be very interested to know what was on the guy's mind. Cedric asked why she decided to take him to the Duke's estate after all. In fact, Renee wanted to improve her relationship with her apprentice. Cedric called out to the girl and said that he didn't want her to be burdened by his training. He said that in terms of lessons, just being around her was enough for him. However, in truth, RNS was not at all, and times with Cedric. It was much easier for her to understand the situation when the guy was around. However, the guy said that it could have been better if he wasn't around. The explanation was that Renee was the famous daughter of the only duke in the empire, while Cedric, on the other hand, was a lowly commoner and orphan. Just by the fact that Renee took him with her, she had already done a lot for him. Renee asked what exactly Cedric's words meant. The boy said that the fact that she took him with her to the temple convinced her that she wanted to be friends with him. He added that the aristocrats didn't treat a commoner swordmaster in the best way. And the Marquis family was known for their sword arts. It only got worse because of that. Cedric was very self-conscious about his origins, and yet he didn't want to mess with the aristocrats, so he gave up the title of Marquis and remained a knight. But the fact remained, all the aristocrats wanted to brand Cedric a commoner. Cedric's words had a great impact on the girl. She realized that it wasn't just about Cedric's skills. The aristocrats probably feared that if he gained a lot of influence, they might be in danger, so they tried to undermine his authority and get rid of him any way they could. All people were the same. Even Renee herself was familiar with this kind of thing. Many people feared and respected her authority, but at the same time waited for her downfall. Sometimes they tried to trick her into getting her attention and using her, and then betray her and ruin her reputation. In this world, however, that role belonged not to Renee, but to Cedric. Still, Renee thought that Cedric was worried about her for nothing. He didn't see how the priests shunned her. The girl thought that associating with someone like her, who was often called a villain, was supposed to tarnish her reputation. However, Cedric's reputation was so impressive that this concern was ridiculous. Renee asked Cedric if people really did call him the light of the Empire. The boy confirmed those words and admitted that it was rather embarrassing. Renee thought ignore it, but since it was so serious, as an elder with a similar life, she had to give advice. Renee said that even she, an aristocrat, had dishonored her family, and Cedric, a commoner, the light of the Empire. He was probably already aware of why they couldn't get behind him. Renee poked Cedric on the nose with her finger and said that even though he was wrung out and tired, he didn't have to avoid anyone and keep his confidence. Renee added that Cedric shouldn't care about other people's opinions. That's how fools created the appearance of their importance. So she gave the guy the advice to stand his ground and not frown. From now on, no one had to care about him. From now on, the lad had no time to worry about those who didn't like him and who didn't like him. She earnestly told Cedric to believe in his reputation and act decisively by doing what his abusers, the aristocrats, didn't like. He had to be sure of himself, as Renee had once been sure of herself. Cedric was Renee's guest from this point on, and it would be strange if he didn't behave freely. Now, Renee had a real enthusiast in terms of housework, so he shouldn't have aroused any suspicion. Even though it sounded a little strange, he was actually once again glad that he had chosen Renee as his teacher. Cedric was Renee's guest from now on, and it would be strange if he didn't behave freely. Now Renee had a real enthusiast for housework, so he shouldn't have aroused any suspicion. Even though it sounded a little strange, he was once again glad that he had chosen Renee as his teacher. Of course, as soon as Renee entered the castle with Cedric, they were met by Alan and Kian, whose faces were slightly displeased. Renee immediately said that since Cedric had agreed to help her, no one should have started fighting for no reason. However, she decided not to divulge the fact that they were now teacher and student. These words did not make Alan happy. He immediately addressed his family by name and menacingly asked her where her manners were. She was the daughter of a duke, arrived at the castle in the middle of the night, but also brought a man with her. Of course, the girl knew that was exactly how her older brother was supposed to react. Renee stared at Alan with a serious look. She didn't like the fact that her older brother was talking to her in a rude tone, so she rather in a disgruntled face told him to do what she wanted here. However, in a rude tone, asked him not to call her lady anymore. Renee said that no one paid attention to what she said, and her brothers couldn't even handle one younger sister without getting frustrated. So the girl didn't feel like a noble person, but an ordinary person who was eager to justify herself. Alan replied that no matter how much Renee tried to be cruel, she was still an aristocrat and the daughter of a duke. And no matter how much of an investigator the crown prince and master swordsman was, Cedric was still a commoner. The boy added that the girl should know her place and go to her room immediately. Renee smiled and said that for once Alan had said something right. Cedric was one of the 2 swordmasters in the Empire, but his background was not that important. And instead of what we think about it, everyone should have focused on learning new things and improving. At those words, the black-haired Cedric stunned a bit. The girl said that Razva brought such an important guest into the house, the brothers should have immediately started to take care of him. And below thought they were just as important, but were such fools. The 2 brothers realized that they had been specifically read off, and it was done by the most problematic person in their family, Renee. Alan asked Renee if she really thought she could invite anyone into the house now. Even though she denied her innocence, she didn't dare bring a strange person into her father's house and show them off for public viewing. Renee was not going to budge from her own. She shouted at Alan and asked why he cared. She had brought a man who could prove that she was innocent, and if her older brother wasn't going to help her his course of reputation, then, in that case, he should have just shut up and sat in silence. Alan didn't know what to say. Seeing her older brother finally run out of eyes, Renee pushed Cedric in the back and said that it was time for the two of them to go. But just as Alan wanted to add something, Renee called him quite obscene words and walked away. Renee was busy with her student and her guest, so Alan had to stop bothering her and read tomorrow's paper. And after that, he would come to her and talk to her already. Of course, the older brother didn't understand anything, but Kian said that it was a complete failure on his brother's part. It was the first time he had ever seen Renee act so confident. And even if she was crazy, and she was recognized by the mercenary king himself, and that definitely inspired confidence. Kian added that if Renee did turn out to be innocent, then the family would only benefit from it. In response to that, Alan only remained silent. He understood that, and that was why it bothered him. Alan realized that Yi was still telling the truth. Then everyone would lose their only suspect. The guy was racking his own brain as to how he could find Liana, who he missed dearly. The next morning, Renee was lying in her bed. She would have loved to sleep some more, but the sun, injecting its blinding rays from the windows, wouldn't let her. Raising her hand, the girl noticed for the first time how warm the sunlight was. She was unfamiliar with the sensation, as warmth was not felt in the tower, where only monsters dwelt. It seemed to the girl that she was truly done with that place from now on. She thought that Cedric soon should have woken up. It didn't seem like the people in this manor usually helped guests, so the girl decided to go see him herself. She had prepared him psychologically, but he was still scared. To her own surprise, Renee had one more simultaneously useful and uncomfortable passive skill. She often used her heightened senses, which helped her a lot in the tower. Any knock in that place could mean that thousands of enemies were coming. She had to use this skill constantly to survive. And as the name of this skill in commas itself said, her senses were so heightened that the girl could not sleep or eat normally. However, after entering the new world, Renee could no longer use her heightened senses. That Cedric had come, she was informed by Mara, one of the dream demon leaders. And the reason why Renee decided to get rid of this skill was very simple. In the current world, apparently no one dared to lay a finger on Renee. One of them was a girl named Ellen, who despised the Duke's daughter very much. The girl asked what was going on. Ellen answered her that she had been asked to go downstairs, and at the girl's question, why, the maids laughed. They asked if she was interested because she really didn't know. The only person who wanted to see her in the whole duchy was the master, who was eager to tell her off. Renee realized that something was wrong here. She wondered how she could best deal with the maids who were so very fond of making fun of her. Finally, the young girls declared that Renee still didn't seem to know her place, and she was not the lady of the House of Marquis, but the disgrace of the family. Helene began to count her mistress's faults on her fingers. Renee did not know how to handle a sword, had a bad temper, and reputation she was generally silent. Mistress could only dress beautifully and pretend. Of course, it was quite normal for Renee to accuse others. However, what was happening now was not the first time. She asked the maids why everyone was relying on a useless numerical advantage. She wondered what to do with them, whether to buy them with money or try to negotiate. However, still she decided to rely on her strength. Ellen smiled and wondered what Renee could have done. The young masters Alan and Kian had all the power, not her. However, that didn't mean Renee couldn't do anything. No one currently present knew anything about her. Renee hovered over Helene and fixed her with her glassy gaze. She stared at her so intently that the maid began to drown the blood in her veins and run out of air in her lungs. Ellen coughed and fell to her knees. Tears began to flow from her eyes and she began to beg for help. She couldn't breathe. Renee stood over the helpless maid and used a spell, after which she immediately fell to the floor unconscious. The maids, who were watching all this, realized and began to fear that the girl had killed the maid. However, she only just put her to sleep for a while to gag her. The other maids, who had fallen to their knees in fear, began to beg the girl not to kill her. They admitted that they were wrong. Of course, all these words did not cause the girl to feel pity, only boredom. When Renee was weak, she was neglected many times, and when she gained strength, she went straight to death. There was no peace in her, neither in weakness nor in strength. Renee said that the maids were weak, and for some unknown reason, they hurt the weak. However, in the end, it was she who resorted to force. Finally, deciding to end this whole spectacle, the girl asked the maid where to go. The young girl, with tears in her eyes, urged the girl to go at once to the dining room. Renee smiled sweetly as she walked away. She realized that now the news of this was going to spread, and the maids were not going to bother her anymore. But on the contrary, they were going to respect her. As soon as Renee opened the door, she saw Cedric in front of her. He was already packed and looked quite awake. He said that he felt an eerie energy in the girl's room, so he decided to check the situation. The guy coughed and awkwardly asked if Renee was okay. The girl smiled and asked in response why she should be not okay. She started to inundate him with answers. Did he come here to blame her or tell her she was being too cruel? But the guy raised his eyebrows and asked why he would do that. Renee replied that everyone she had met said it was all her fault, but Cedric leaned in and asked if he had ever treated her like that. He had always been and would always be on her side. The girl smiled and happily admitted it. Renee decided to summarize and said that Alan had asked her for a meeting, so she and Cedric were to go to his place together. The guy immediately agreed, smiling sweetly. As soon as the girl arrived at her brother's house, she immediately felt a barrage of furious screams. Alan was stabbing the newspaper and asking his sister to explain herself immediately. The paper said that Pastor Libed said that he was unable to prevent the goddess's escape at dawn. Before that, he heard the saint talking in her sleep and saying how she was supposed to escape from the prince's crowns. According to the pastor, this had to mean something. The paper also said that he was currently participating in the investigation in good faith, as a witness who had seen Saint and a victim who had been forced by the prince to give false testimony. In addition to this, the paper wrote that Renee Marquis, currently considered the prime suspect in the murder, had raised suspicion against the crown prince who had concealed the witness and pressed charges. Renee was silent during this time and happily ate her breakfast. Finally, she stared at Alan and said that he was very loud. She wondered if he really wanted her to explain things to him. Alan, on the other hand, demanded that she explain the article to him. Renee was even more surprised and asked him what she was supposed to explain to him. Was it that he couldn't read? Or did he want her to read to him? Only wanted his older brother to object to something, as he was quickly calmed down by Cedric ordering him to calm down. Alan smacked his head on his forehead. He didn't understand how Renee had the audacity to spread rumors about His Highness the Crown Prince. He asked the girl if she had even thought about what kind of trouble their family would be in after this article was published, and what kind of trouble her father was in now that he was still in the palace. Renee showed no emotion. She calmly ate her breakfast and said that she believed that Alan was only so emotional because he was hungry, so he had to eat at least a little. Renee said she would be sure to prove that she was innocent. She asked Alan if he had read the priest's testimony. His name was made up, but the rest was true. Alan asked the girl if the information could really be trusted. Cedric answered for Renee, saying that he wasn't sure, but the prince must have had a reason why he wanted to hide the witness and the information from everyone. Alan said that was pretty weird. He asked Cedric if he had investigated the case on behalf of His Highness, but Cedric replied that he had not sworn allegiance to the crown prince. He was only investigating the case because he, as an imperial knight, was ordered to find out the truth. He was just doing his job. Alan looked at Cedric with his steely gaze and asked if the investigation was to provide proof to the prime suspect, his sister. Cedric conjured the same look and asked Alan if he was uncomfortable with the fact that he, an ordinary man, was helping his sister, or with the fact that she had been cleared of all suspicion. Renee watched this with great admiration. She could see that Cedric was currently growing on top of himself. His conversation with Alan was like a wolf and a chicken about to pounce on each other. However, the outcome of this battle was, of course, obvious. Alan said that he didn't know that Cedric was his sister's friend. The boy replied that it was okay not to know that, because it wasn't true. However, he was working on it. And after saying that, the boy looked at the girl with the sweetest look she had ever seen. Renee touched Cedric's shoulder and sighed with relief. She recognized that the guy had a way of saying such embarrassing words that made her melt. Now, Renee stared at Alan and said it was his turn now. He had to apologize for forgetting that he was in groups with her guest and close friend yesterday. Cedric was the crown prince's investigator and master swordsman, and the fact that he was of common blood made no difference. Cedric was a little embarrassed, but was glad that his teacher had stood up for him. However, Alan admitted his mistake, bowed his head and apologized, saying that he was at fault for what had happened yesterday. Cedric liked those words, but he said out of politeness that Alan shouldn't have apologized, because he should have apologized to someone else. Alan made an uncomprehending face and asked with surprise why he had to apologize to Renee. The girl stood up for herself and said that her brother had been rude to her and pissed off like their gorilla. The guy replied that Renee had been rude to him too, and because of her, their family would now be calculated by the one who killed Saint. However, the girl found a witness who refuted all the accusations. Anna rudely asked the guy, such times he intended to behave so vilely towards her. Alan tensed up. He said that Renee became the main suspect because of her habitual behavior. Still, there was little proof in the truthfulness of the article. Only if Renee was able to provide more concrete evidence. In that case, Alan would definitely apologize and repent. Still, Renee admitted that Alan was right in those words. But he still pissed her off. She wished with all her heart that it would all be over soon and that she would get away from him. Renee slammed her knife down on the table and wondered if they could finally have a proper breakfast, and if they had finally closed the subject. In that case, it was now time to prepare to receive a special guest. The castle was going to have someone coming soon, and understandably Alan again was confused. Renee added that the special guest was not invited by anyone. He had decided to come on his own. In other words, he was uninvited. However, Alan still did not understand what the girl meant, and immediately the butler burst into the room shouting that he had urgent news that he had to tell Alan right away. After the butler's words in Alan's ear, the boy became furiously angry and threw his chair at the wall. He approached the door, swinging it open with all his might. Grinning, he started yelling at Renee, asking what she had done. Renee waved her hands, laughing at how fiery her brother was. Cedric asked if he really hadn't been the only guest. Renee confirmed that, but added that the uninvited guests were strongly familiar to the boy. A few minutes later, Renee was already standing in the alley in the garden of the Marquis house. She watched from afar as Alan chatted with the man whose hair was golden in color. Finally, she decided to meet the mysterious man in person. The mysterious, uninvited guest turned out to be the crown prince of the Ramdish Empire, whom Renee used to love. Irving von Ramdish was the name of the beautiful-looking fellow. He called out to the girl, urging her to speak. Renee smiled and greeted His Highness. She said she was honored to finally meet Irving. From the first time she met him, she had sensed that she would end up contacting him in a most uncomfortable way. The girl immediately felt the tension between them. Alan decided to stand up for his sister and change the topic of conversation. He asked Aiden what brought him here. The prince didn't even deign to contact the owner of the castle before arriving. However, Irving ignored Alan's words and walked over to Reyna, grabbing her chin with 2 fingers. He said that the girl didn't even try to hide what had changed. He stared at her with his red eyes and asked her who she really was. This situation alarmed Cedric, but Renee kept the situation under control. The girl slapped the prince on the arm and said that he had no right to touch her without permission. She suggested that they should not provoke each other, but rather tell the prince what he wanted to say, and then leave. Renee had heard that Irving was the strongest in the empire, but she realized that he was still no match for her. The prince clenched his hand into a fist and said that he was sure that Ren was the one to blame for the saint's disappearance. Renee realized that the principal was trying to crush her with his aura. Probably an ordinary person wouldn't have been able to withstand such pressure, but Renee was an extraordinary person. She stared at Irving and said that he should have trusted anyone but himself for once. Alan stepped forward, shielding Renee. He turned to the prince and said that he shouldn't have put so much pressure on a child who had never held a sword. Renee finally felt her older brother decide to take her side, though he was trembling all over. Irving grasped the hilt of his double-edged sword with his hand. He repeated Alan's words about the child who didn't hold a sword. He wondered if he had said that about the man who now stood firmly in his place. He added that when Liana had disappeared, no one could prove that the Duchess was really to blame because no trace of her had been found. But judging by her strength, it was clear to the prince now. Renee looked calm. She asked if her disappearance concerned the saint in general. The crown prince, however, insisted on his own. He asked if Renee really thought he could believe such nonsense. The girl, however, said that she, on the contrary, had a question for him. She asked if the prince had done anything saint. Irving was already ready to draw his sword. He angrily asked the girl how she even dared to ask him such a thing. Renee, looking at the whole situation, smiled. The greatest swordmaster in the world was scared just at the girl so much that he was already preparing to fight. As soon as the prince drew his sword, he was pushed away by Cedric, who clutched at him with his blade. Irving was furiously surprised. He ordered the lad to get out of the way, but he replied that there was no way he would do that because he believed that the Lady Marquis was innocent. The prince was surprised that his previously loyal assistant was now on Renee's side. However, Cedric replied that he was on his own. However, Irving continued to push his point, shouting that no one in the Empire hated Lyanna as much as Renee did. He said that Lyanna had disappeared into duchy territory, and Renee Marquis was perfectly capable of killing her. Look said he understood the prince, but asked him to calm down. He ordered him to think with his head, that since the man had such abilities, wouldn't he have chosen a more efficient way? And if Irving really wanted to find the saint, now it was time for him to team up with them. Renee was surprised that Irving only shrugged in response to all these words. If Cedric hadn't stopped him, Renee would have struck first. She would control her power, of course, but she wouldn't be shy about venting her anger on the hapless prince either. After a moment's thought, Irving put his sword back in its scabbard. He said that Renee suspected him of the saint's disappearance. He asked the girl to explain herself. Renee replied that it was he who had hidden the witnesses, and he had also accused her and put her in the dungeon. She hoped that he understood that she had done it out of emotion, and so she apologized. After a little thought, Irving put his sword back in its scabbard. He said that Renee suspected him of the saint's disappearance. He asked the girl to explain herself. Renee replied that he was the one who hid the witnesses and also accused her and put her in the dungeon. She hoped that he understood that she did it out of emotion, and so she apologized. Renee folded her arms across her chest and said that their conversation must be very long, so she suggested that they go to the gazebo where it would be much easier to dialogue. Suddenly, on the way to the gazebo, Alan grabbed the girl's arm and asked in a half tone what power the prince was talking about. Renee, determined to answer her brother's question, ordered the others to go first, saying she would catch up with them. Renee looked into Alan's eyes. Oi tried to stop the crown prince and protect Renee from him. However, with such a bad relationship with each other, they couldn't trust each other. So the girl decided to fix the situation and finally get closer to her older brother. At first, Renee decided to withhold the secret on her own strength, but Alan reminded her of who he was to Renee. He had a right to know if it concerned his sister. Renee took his hand and asked, since when had they become so close that Alan had the right to know everything about his sister? Renee apologized to Alan to herself, but still thought he had no right to know about her power. The girl cast a spell on him, and he immediately fell into slumber. Of course, from the gazebo where Irving and Cedric were sitting, there was a great view of Renee casting a spell on her own brother. Cedric, on the other hand, could not believe that he had seen his teacher's abilities with his own eyes. Renee carefully seated Alan in one of the chairs that stood in a circle around the table. She said it didn't matter now what she did to her brother, in the form of everyone gathered here to deal with the article in the paper. However, it was quite important to Irving. He finally ordered Renee to answer normal. What kind of power she used? Did she sell her soul to the devil? In response to that, Renee smiled, replies that she had indeed sold it, plus died and was reborn many times after that. Even though Renee was telling the truth, the prince didn't believe her one bit. He ordered her to drop all jokes and finally become more serious. However, the girl realized that even if she told them the truth, no one would believe her. Irving started showering the girl with a ton of questions: how many kinds of magic she could use, whether she didn't sag under his pressure, and whether she could use a sword. But the girl asked him in return for what reason she had to explain her abilities to the prince. Renee said she thought the prince had misunderstood. She had never been his subordinate, nor would she become one, even if they had a common goal. Irving accepted that and promised again that he would not ask any more questions about her skills. However, the prince was interested in the reason why the girl had been hiding them all along. Even if it was known that Renee was a magical swordswoman, she would be treated better. She would have the opportunity to inherit the duchy and get a title, and even start a new family. Irving knew about the law of the jungle, which said that the strong hunted the weak and ruled over them. According to the words she had once heard, the current world was fixated on the law of the jungle. Originally, the continents were led by the monsters here, demonic beasts that were stronger and smarter than humans. In addition, they also multiplied faster. However, one day people managed to surpass them in intelligence. People united and further repulsed the monsters by building walls and creating a state. People showered the monsters with hails of arrows, which helped them chase the monsters away from the border, held by people, and take power over the continent. From the day the monsters left the lands of the humans, the age of men and the period of rebirth began. And when the danger was gone, the humans had already marked their borders and pointed their swords at each other in the fight for resources and the earth. Monsters they decided to destroy and to introduce a permanent war with humans. In the New World, Renee was enveloped by a power-mad family who were more interested in the new face than their bride, and the fact that the lady and family were called a disgrace because of her weakness. Such were the oddities of Renee's life. Renee said that even if she told her strengths, she would be given a place as the heiress of the Marquis, could create a new lineage of aristocrats, and would be taken more seriously. But she was not at all interested in what the prince was talking about. Renee did not understand what would change if she became the heir. Establishing a new family would only add to her problems. She only needed her old life, which she was trying to get back right now. Renee pushed the chair where Alan was sitting. She said that she didn't care at all if she was treated well by people who judged a person by their strength. After the push, Alan collapsed to the ground. Renee said that Prince and everyone else ignored her, humiliated her, didn't consider her a human being. But as soon as she showed her abilities, all the 100 years took her more seriously. It was disgusting to her. However, Renee sensed regret in the prince's words. She asked what would have changed if she had told about everything. Would Irving have taken advantage of being betrothed to her instead of Saint? After these words, the prince pounded his fist on the table. He was beyond angry. Irving wanted to accuse Cedric, but Renee quickly reined him in, telling him not to do so, since he hadn't even sworn allegiance to anyone in the first place. Besides, Renee wasn't at all interested in Irving's relationship with Saint. What was more important to her was to prove her innocence of what had happened. And she also wanted to get back to her world. So she suggested that everyone hurry up. Renee ordered everyone to focus, and said that it was completely irrelevant whether she had powers or not. She pointed her finger at Irving and told him to declare that she had not committed the crime, and then she would withdraw the article. The easiest way to clear herself of a murder charge was to enlist the help of a man who was more respected than Renee herself. That man was Irving. The girl said that the prince himself could have been a suspect like her. But Irving slapped his forehead and asked her why he would kill Liana, his own bride, whom he loved. There was no reason for him to kill a person who was to one day become empress. Renee picked up on the prince's words and said that was the reason. The saint wanted to get away from him. Of course, the girl understood why the crown prince suspected her. Before the main events of the affair, Renee had done a lot of things, so the prince immediately thought of her. However, if the culprit was Irving himself, and he wanted to shift the responsibility, the girl could not tolerate it. Having proved her innocence, Renee had to shift her attention from herself to the new suspect, that is, Irving. From now on, the girl wanted to study everything gradually to see if Prince was really innocent. She wanted to see his true face. Prince said he had no idea where the girl had heard such nonsense. However, a smile was not lost on Renee's face. She said that what she said could very well have been true. The girl said that the prince was unable to keep the saint who wanted to escape. All that the prince could gain from marrying the saint had vanished like a dream on a summer night. And so he decided to kill her. Such was Renee's argument. The girl's words enraged the prince. He boldly declared that Liana had never intended to run away from him. According to him, they loved each other, but Renee had already demanded proof of that. She was the one who could provide proof that she was innocent. The prince slammed his fist on the table, shattering the glass surface. He ordered the girl to listen carefully from now on. He stated that if anyone was innocent of his soulmate's disappearance, it was him. Renee noticed that the prince's aura fluctuated with emotion. If he were a criminal, there would be no such thing. She pondered whether she should have believed his words. Renee spread her hands apart. She said it would probably never end. She decided to consider what was happening as a temporary truce agreement. So for now, she decided to end the whole argument. The terms of the truce were that the prince's charges would be dropped, and Renee would have to withdraw the article from publication. However, Irving said that dropping the charges was out of his hands. Renee raised an eyebrow and asked if Oni himself was the one who investigated the investigation and the disappearance of Saint. In response, Irving smiled. He said that even if he was responsible for it, he needed proof of Renee's innocence. The girl puzzled why the prince was so irritable, and if he was doing it on purpose. Renee rolled her eyes and slid out a small piece of paper on the table, asking if it would be enough. On this piece of paper was the location where the saint was last seen. The prince was surprised at such an unexpected action on the girl's part. Renee said that it was proof that Saint was still alive. And the reason Renee was the prime suspect in Saint's disappearance was because she had disappeared in the territory of the Duchy of Marquis. While Renee was in the dungeon, Saint was not in another place, and since she was still alive, the girl was not a criminal at all, but instead a victim of the incident. Irving carefully reread the contents of the sheet. He didn't understand how Renee had gotten such important information in the first place. However, the girl replied that she had no need to tell him about it at all. She was genuinely surprised that he only cared about the source of the information right now. The prince said that if everyone gathered in this place could indeed find Liana in the location indicated on the sheet, then all charges would be dropped. Renee leaned back in her chair, but the prince told her not to interfere with the investigation and to stay in the duchy, in the castle. Renee was greatly surprised by these words. She could not believe that the prince wanted to take away the information she had obtained. However, Irving said that he thought Renee didn't quite understand the whole situation. He added that no matter how much Renee suspected him, she remained the main accused. As the prince finally enjoyed his triumph, the sheet in his hands crumbled into shreds. He was very much surprised at this, but his surprise was interrupted by Renee saying that the prince must not have understood the whole situation himself. The girl still thought that he was the prime suspect, and certainly she had gotten the information she herself wanted to use. Renee offered to compromise and cooperate because they suspected each other. At least it was better than dying alone. The prince still wondered if there was magic involved. However, he couldn't be sure of Renee's words, as he didn't know if she would kill Liana after finding her. And Renee had already asked how she could be sure that the prince wouldn't. Renee admitted that if she did want to kill the saint, she would have been dead long ago, especially since the proof of those words was the prince's knowledge of her abilities. So, noticing Irving starting to break down, Renee held out her hand to him to finally make a pact as well. However, Irving ignored the gesture. The girl felt more and more strongly that he was a brute, though she recognized that they had made a treaty after all. So she had to get ready and set off in 2 hours to the place the note had indicated. Renee turned to the prince and said that if he disappeared within that time, she would tell the princess everything. And the princess in turn would make sure her brother, wiped that smirk off his face. Renee was called out by Cedric, who wanted to say something to her. He said that she had just allowed herself to grab the prince's hand. The girl didn't understand the purpose of Cedric telling her this, but the guy silently took out a handkerchief from his pocket and wiped her hand. All this was watched with disgust by Irving, who could not refrain from reproaching Cedric for becoming Renee Marquise's tame dog. However, the lad decided to defend his honor and his teacher by ordering the prince to watch his language. Irving said that he had no idea what Renee had told him, that he had suddenly changed his attitude, but he was still bound to regret it in the future. However, Cedric thought that he would definitely regret it if he continued to listen to the prince. Cedric said that Renee was very different from the prince himself. To compare her to him would be insulting. However, these words offended Irving a bit that he said it was a show of disrespect on Cedric's part. The prince folded his arms on his chest and said that it seemed to him that there was some hidden meaning in Cedric's words that was not clear to him yet. But the boy turned his back to him and said that it just seemed to him. In the meantime, he had to get ready to leave. The next day, all three of them were rushing on their horses. Irving called out to Renee, asking if everything was all right. The girl didn't understand why the guy asked that, but it suddenly dawned on her that she had left the territory of the Duchy of Marquis, but could that be a reason for anything to be wrong? Irving said that it was well known to everyone that Renee had not left her territory except for banquets. The girl replied to this that one could not spend one's whole life only on one's own territory. The prince replied that it was quite surprising to hear the girl say that. The girl replied that it was nothing surprising. In fact, the prince knew nothing about her, nor did she know anything about her former life in this affair. She thought that before the main events, she was just a straight-up villain. But the more she got to know herself, the more complicated she seemed to be. Prince said he knew Renee had never worn the type of clothes she was wearing now. Renee had never worn anything but dresses. Now, however, she preferred comfortable clothes that she was comfortable in. And now Irving wondered quite intelligently why the girl hadn't dressed like this before. Renee, from such a turn, was a little confused, but quickly pulled herself together and said that she would tell everything on the way. The girl reminded the prince that she had no feelings for him now. She asked Irving how it felt to have one less fan in his life. Prince was just as confused by the question. Renee asked if Irving really thought she would always be running after him. She added that once this was over, she would no longer want to see him. Therefore, he didn't have to worry about it anymore. The prince started apologizing in advance and said that he was sincerely bringing a message. But the girl said that she had already made up her mind and promised herself that she would stop communicating with the prince and would never love him again. Irving grinned and asked Renee what she was going to do next. The girl didn't understand the question, but the prince meant if she was going to hit on someone else. He didn't think Renee was capable of finding feeling for him or Cedric again. The girl was quite offended by those words. She said that Cedric was her subordinate and a good knight in general. However, Irving reminded her that yesterday he had seen flitting around her and trying to impress her. He appealed to her sense of compassion, or I tried to make a good impression by showing strength. The girl became even more annoyed by these words. She defiantly frowned and said that she had no idea what the prince was talking about. She ordered him to go about his life, and preferably stay out of hers. Renee was extremely annoyed by this conversation, but she was called out by Cedric, whom she was quite happy to see. The guy said they should have arrived by now in a couple hours. Of course, the road seemed like a very long time for the girl, so she became even more angry. Cedric lowered his eyes and apologized. But the girl reminded him that it was up to those who were riding behind to apologize. If anything, Irving was the reason they were wasting their time. Besides, they were accompanied by knights who were stalling for time. The girl found that the more time passed, the more unclear the situation became to her. Cedric did not understand what his teacher meant. However, the girl was not going to answer the question. She only said in her head that she should have shunned people like the prince. Cedric furrowed his brow and said that the girl had only had to give orders, and he would have gladly beheaded the prince to stop bothering her. However, if Renee wanted to get rid of the prince, she would have removed him long ago. That was the end of their conversation. Cedric glanced at Renee once more, asking if she was all right. He thought she was more restless than usual. Renee wanted to get to the place much faster. She used a spell that made the horse move faster. She said she was going to ride ahead, and the others were to meet her at the location. Though Renee didn't really give much of a look, she was really worried. Cedric was right in that she was tense. She wanted to finish what she had started as soon as possible, and finally get rid of the accusation that was bothering her a lot. The girl realized that the novel she found herself in was of a different genre than the previous one. However, she wasn't going to stop and do what she had long intended. Just in case, she tried harder, realizing that at times like the current one, she couldn't be bothered. Renee realized that right now she needed to focus on proving her innocence. But she couldn't think about it forever. She didn't want to be a part of this affair forever. More than anything, she wanted to get home. The note Renee had in her possession had the name of the last place the saint had been seen. It was simple, ordinary, small, and not small, where she was most likely supposed to be. It was to this place that she was headed. Upon arrival, the crown prince was called out by one of the knights who claimed to have caught the one who had taken Saint and helped her escape. Renee realized that if there weren't the prince's men swarming the area, they would have found the wanted woman quickly. The man who was apprehended by the guards went by the name of Derek. He had a small smile on his face that made the prince very angry. The guy pulled out his knife and said that if the suspect didn't want his name embossed on his tombstone, he had better tell her where Liana was. The man, the smile disappearing on his face, said that the saint had indeed stayed with him. However, if it wasn't for the leaflet the knights had shown him, he wouldn't have realized it was her. The prince wondered why the saint had come to see him. The man, however, replied that he had simply offered to let her sleep over and stay for the day. The man wanted to add something else. He began to stutter, and seeing this one, Renee quickly changed the subject and took the prince's hand. She ordered the suspect to escort him to his house and point out the place where Liana had spent the night. The man who had been detained by the knights interrogated the girl. She, however, didn't understand what was so surprising about her question. In any case, everything had to be thoroughly checked for any traces. Resignedly, the suspect pointed his finger at one of the buildings in the city. The building itself was luxurious. It looked a bit like a castle where counts lived. Perhaps it might have seemed to some that this was the kind of place that Saint, who had been accustomed to living in luxury since birth, would want to come to. As she walked around the courtyard, Renee noticed one of the statues, which seemed a little strange. Then, she smelled a strange odor, which was familiar to her and seemed strange to her. As soon as Renee made her assumptions as to where the smell could be coming from, she rushed towards the castle entrance. Cedric wanted to stop her and ask her what was wrong, but he couldn't, so he followed her. As she moved down the castle corridor, Renee could smell the odor becoming more and more distinct. She ran into each of the rooms, but none of them had the source of the smell. Finally, she stopped in front of some distant door, and something told her that behind it was where the odor was coming from. Cedric caught up with her, asking if she had found anything. The boys were interrupted by the prince, who advised the girl to stop and act willfully. Otherwise, she might get into trouble. When Renee opened the door, which was actually a closet, she was sure of her assumptions. Behind the door, there was a corpse, from which came the very odor that Renee smelled. And to everyone's surprise, on the burned hand, on one of the fingers, there was a gold ring. After this news, the knights again detained the owner of the house, saying that now the death penalty awaits him. The man, however, tried to ward himself off and assured everyone that he was uninvolved and knew nothing about the corpse. Most of the knights immediately lost faith that anyone would be able to find the saint. People loved her, and news of her death could make a lot of noise, unwanted by the entire empire. Cedric began to look at the corpse, noticing that there was still smoke coming from the ashes. He knew that it took 2 to 3 hours to completely burn a person, and judging by the heat coming from the corpse, it had burned about 20 minutes ago. Renee didn't deny herself a glimpse of the corpse either, which could very well have been Saint. It appeared that the body had been burning while they had all wandered under the village. They had lost time wasting it on nonsense. A minor difference played a key role. If Irving hadn't brought the knights, if Renee had acted alone, perhaps she could have saved the identity that died such a gruesome death. Most impressive of all was the prince's discovery. He fell to his knees, beginning to tear at the wisps of hair on his head. He began to believe that the corpse was Liana, his fiancée. The thought shattered him. He really did love her. Cedric finally dared to speculate and say that the corpse belonged to the saint. Renee replied that it was still in question, but there was a sacred power coming off of the burned remains and descending from it that she could purely feel. There weren't many people in the world who possessed sacred power. If a person possessed a rather powerful power, it remained even after their death. Sacred energy hovered around them like an aura. Reno thought that there was no more horrible sight than the sight of a body burned alive and mutilated. She realized that it hadn't been long since he had tanned. Accompanied by 2 companions, Renee galloped onward. This was proof that the saint had been alive until recently. The prince, on the other hand, was puzzled as to why someone had dared to kill his bride. He held the ring that was on the corpse's finger and wondered what had wronged his Liana so much. The thing that was on the corpse's finger was the engagement ring that Irving had personally given her. He was sure of it, for he could recognize it among 1,000 others. It had a strong spell cast on it that couldn't be broken by ordinary force. That was why it was the only one that had survived. Though the present situation was a nasty one, Renee realized that because of it, she had been able to prove her innocence in the disappearance or murder of Saint, the prince's bride, over whose body he was now grieving. However, it wasn't the first time Renee had seen people die in a fire. The tower owner she had bothered to kill in a past novel also liked to burn people alive. When her fellow siblings were caught in the same aid, there was only one sight to observe. She watched them perish in flames at the top of the tower while the monster rampaged in a mad dance. Renee was very familiar with the smell of flesh burned to the ground. Because past lives she had encountered it too often. She could recognize it from 1,000, even if there were many scents wafting through the air that most would consider pleasant. The prince, literally mad with grief, grabbed the man, the owner of the castle, by the scruff of the neck. The man tried in every way to deny involvement in the incident. He did not know to whom the corpse belonged, but he tried his best to justify himself. But Irving intended to draw his sword from its sheath and stab through the man he blamed for the murder of his fiancée. However, the only one who prevented Irving from finishing what he had started was Cedric. The boy took the prince by the shoulder and ordered him to calm down, as there was no solid evidence against the suspect. The prince was already literally sobbing, but he listened to Cedric and just threw the man to the floor. The accused was questioned about where the victim left from, but he replied that she did not say a word and just left the place. This meant that the corpse found in the closet belonged to her. The girl leaned over to Cedric and asked him to step out for a while. The guy assumed that she wanted to interrogate him. She confirmed those words and asked him not to let anyone in, not even the prince, who was heartbroken. Renee leaned over to Derek, said something from now on, he was to tell only the truth and nothing else. To waste no time, Renee used one of her learned spells through which she penetrated the suspect's head and tried to read his mind. This use skill was quite handy, however there was a risk if Renee decided to pick the wrong target. So, to someone like Irving, it was not worth taking it. After reading the spell, Renee ordered the man to recall the last time he had seen Liana. The bewitched Derek replied that he had only seen darkness. Despite his vague words, however, the girl was certain that the spell had worked on him. Derek, muttering to himself under his nose, said that he didn't feel the sacred power of the holy. It wasn't sacred at all, but instead demonic. However, Renee was already enlightened on this, as the saint could not have suffered at the hands of demons alone. However, judging from the fact that the culprits used the power of suggestion, he definitely possessed such power. Renee didn't understand what the one who had committed such a thing was trying to accomplish by going to such lengths. The girl burst into the room to the prince, who was examining his sword. She determined that he probably had something to say to her. Understandably, the lad was impressed by such a display. He asked Renee's what she meant. Renee's, with a formidable look, charged that the prince was able to find the saint's suicide note that was on her burnt body. The guy didn't even bother to hide that it was true. He only asked her if she had a secret liaison with her knights. Renee wrote it all off as intuition, however she saw it in Derek's thoughts, which she got into his head thanks to a spell. Irving pointed his sword at the girl, saying that her behavior didn't seem like simple intuition to him. He said she was either definitely in cahoots with his subjects or she was spying on him. He was 100% sure of one of the two. The girl didn't move an inch as the prince's blade approached her neck. She said he would have done the same thing in her place. Irving, however, responded by saying that he was precisely not in her shoes. Irving pulled a note out of his jacket pocket and added that he hadn't shown it for Renee's safety. Of course, the girl didn't understand what the move was about, but the prince told her that he wanted to see how she could stay as calm as she was when she read it. Renee snatched the letter from the prince's hands with a grin. It wrote that the saint's life had been marred by tragedy. She couldn't say anything because of her duties for the sake of the empire and those who believed in her. However, she could not tolerate it any longer. The letter also mentioned a fake engagement to a man, a prince who didn't love her. He was the one who tried to kill her because of this situation. And both of these facts tormented Saint for a long time. She couldn't come to terms with them. As much as these two facts tormented the girl, she could happily say that she accepted them because she had someone she couldn't forgive. It was she who had allowed herself to be dragged into this situation. Reno couldn't read the note all the way through. She clutched the flyer in her hand and said that she was now with the prince in the same boat that was going down, and they had to deal with this situation together. Irving crossed his arms over his chest and said he didn't understand what Renee meant. But the girl replied at once that if anyone found out about this letter and its contents, it would be the end of them both. Nothing would help them to save themselves. Renee realized that if she made flaws in some of her plans, it didn't really hurt her. But if it went on from time to time, it was hard for her to imagine how it could end up hurting her. According to the girl's calculations, something big was going to have to turn out soon. But the prince insisted that she keep her mouth shut and no one would find out. The man added that Liana couldn't have done such a thing. He said she was stupid, and very stupid at that. And Renee confirmed that the letter had probably been set up by someone else. She did not cease to be amazed, however, that Irving did not feel threatened by it. The girl said that, in any case, the person who had written the letter was very much against her and the prince. To Irving himself, Irving replied that his knights kept secrets well, and he was not going to make any statement until he was sure exactly to whom the corpse belonged. This idea seemed rather silly to the girl. That was why she said that if Irving was so sure of himself, they should have discussed it first. If he did, rumors about the note were likely to spread. Or not, if he was careful. The prince didn't understand what the girl meant. She answered him that he wasn't the only one here not up to him on what was going on. She asked what he had hoped for, that he was so at ease with himself in this seemingly horrible situation. Ronnie said that this situation was a trap to make her and him complicit. So she advised him to hide the note and say no, that he trusted his men. Because not everything was of his will. The girl did not tire of saying that it would not be long before the whole empire would know what was written in the note. Irving, on the other hand, asked if Reno really thought his knights could have divulged such important information, even at the risk of their own lives. According to him, they weren't like that at all. That was why Renee was proposing an argument. Irving would have to try to believe in his knights himself, and she would have to trust her experience, which she had managed to vouch for in the many stages of life she had passed through. Having spread his hands, the prince nevertheless decided to go to the dispute. He added that if he won, he would say so, and if Renee won, that according to him it was unlikely, will do everything according to her plan. The girl said she didn't think it would take long to resolve the dispute. She pointed her finger to one side, saying that the very knights the prince trusted so much were already coming from there. The prince's office was stormed by the knights, who, on the outside, were more extremely tense. They stated that all over the empire, there was only talk of Liana's suicide note. Everyone now considered Irina and Renee as the indirect killers of Saint. Renee still managed to get out of the argument, but she was not happy about it at all. Her reputation was not the best as it was, and after the news that managed to spread throughout the empire, everyone began to hate and curse her. Rena still managed to get rid of the false accusation of Liana's murder, but soon another misunderstanding was going to happen to her. She and Irving von Ramdisch were considered to be involved in the fact that the saint had committed suicide. The girl realized that to get out of this situation, and it was necessary to join forces with the prince and gain everyone's trust. Liana's notes became known to everyone, and Renee returned to the Duke's estate, as if trying to avoid. She wanted to stay there and continue the investigation, but Cedric, for the sake of her safety, insisted on his own. The most important thing, however, was that Renee now had to endure all these suspicious looks, even though she had done nothing. Cedric and Irving had gone to the Imperial Palace as a surprise to find out what was going on. The girl began to think that it would be much easier to just eliminate the prince rather than trying to remove suspicion from herself. A friend, someone knocked on the door leading to Renee's room. A male voice was heard, from which it was clear that her younger brother wanted to enter. As soon as the guy entered the room, he saw a picture of Renee lying on the couch, surrounded by feathers from pillows that the girl had torn up in a fit of anger. The guy, not minding but giving it due consideration, said, "Her father asked me to tell her that she was cleared of all murder charges." Guy said that their entire family was being summoned to the capital. It looked like the elder duke was going to go all out, so the girl had to prepare herself. Renee noticed how her younger brother was poring. He was very different from Alan, who liked to show how angry he was. The thing was, he loved Liana. Renee, just in case, asked Kian again if Alan really loved Saint. The guy immediately answered her that he had suffered from unrequited love for 10 years. He thought it was strange that a different person could forget about it. Alan was very angry at her to stop bullying her, his love. Renee finally realized what was going on. Her brother's anger at her was justified by the fact that she was very much in love with the girl he was in love with. It hurt him. He wanted to stand up for her, so he took his anger out on his sister. However, it was still strange to the girl that her brother considered her for a murderer, his own sister. How strong his love for her must have been that he was willing to go to such lengths. The girl asked Kian to stop for a while. She reminded him that Liana was betrothed to the prince, and for that reason, Alan couldn't do anything about it. Well, their relationship was all very confusing and dark. Renee called out to her brother and asked him if he too thought that she was the one who killed Liana. The guy replied that he didn't think she did it personally, but the girl reminded him that the note said that she had a hard time because of her, which meant that she was indirectly responsible for the death. Kian furrowed his eyebrows and said that his sister was very strange lately and didn't seem like herself. She didn't remember a lot of things and she was shabby. It seemed like she had grown up. Kian also added that Renee never said that she wanted to kill Saint. Those words made her flustered. She turned to the guy and told him to immediately explain what he meant. The guy said he didn't think those assassins who dealt with Saint weren't sent by Renee. Still, it appeared to Kian that Renee was pretending like she didn't know anything. But she paid no attention to those words and asked him if he knew who was involved in the plot against the girl. The Saint was the guardian of the Empire. If the person who was responsible for her murder had a grudge against the Empire or the Crown Prince, he could very well wait for the assassin to ruin them all. Since the prince had a title, it meant that the conspirator wished for the collapse of the Empire, and most likely supported the prince, Irving's sister. Everyone in the Marquis family knew that she wasn't smart enough to send different assassins. Alan had locked Renee in the castle because he was losing his head when it came to Saint. That's why Kian didn't think Renee had anything to do with Liana's murder. Now Renee was furious with her brother, asking why everyone around him was so sure it was her doing. He replied that everyone thought so because she herself had announced it at the ball. Renee told everyone to watch out for herself because she was a scary person who could very well have sent assassins. Renee started freaking out even more, asking why her brothers didn't think to shut her up at that ball. She said that if she had acted stupidly, they should have made more of an effort to stop her. Renee realized that if Kian was to be believed, then, according to his version of events, Renee of the two main events herself took someone else's sin. Her family never took her seriously because of her weakness, so she was afraid that society would as well. Renee was such a scary person that she was willing to kill the universally adored Saint Liana. Therefore, people shouldn't have allowed themselves to treat her down. She was strong and alienated from the norms of the world. Perhaps that was what Renee wanted to prove. Before the snow of events, Renee had withdrawn herself from everyone, and she was still the same little girl who never learned how to protect herself. Lowering her eyes, she told Kian that they should have stopped it. Since, by the way, he was at fault too. He had idly watched and raised his sister wrong. After all, he knew how Rena was treated by everyone in the neighborhood. The girl looked at her brother and realized that he was most likely aware of it himself. No wonder, since he had personally relayed his father's words. Rejoiced at this fact, as Kian was beginning to change. Now, everyone had a chance to mend their ways. However, Renee said that her brother would still have to answer for his behavior. She decided to take responsibility and solve the problem, so Kian had to help her since he was her half-brother. The Marquis family certainly didn't have the best relationship. It was never too late to improve. And even if things didn't work out, everyone should have tried. It was the only way things could get back to normal. Duke Marquis's mansion in the capital of the empire was doused in sunlight. However, everything inside was shining as well. Renee was in one of the rooms that was so huge, as if it was the Duke's entire mansion. However, that wasn't the main thing right now. After her brother's words, the native remembered something. Those who find themselves in an unfair situation like herself needed to speak out. However, she had no such acquaintances before. Therefore, she assumed that there must not have been a diary in which she wrote down all her thoughts. The girl could not even think that Renee might not have sent an assassin, because she was considered by everyone to be a rare villain. Her diary lay under her pillow, and wondered how she had not found it before. No one had ever cleaned it. Renee read her diary, which she kept before the main events. Penetrated by the lines, she promised herself that she would definitely fix her life for the better and make sure that her future was only bright. Renee decided to start with the last notes, which were written on the paper, which blurred from the tears shed on it. The girl did not understand why, despite her remorse, no one believed her. She really hadn't touched Liana. Even her father believed only in words, yet she felt that wasn't true. Renee read a line that seemed to have been written before she was locked in the dungeon. The lines were about one of the girls named Talia. She constantly acted arrogant, that Renee herself didn't even realize she had told the truth. Renee now realized that she shouldn't have said that she had sent Liana the poison earlier. However, if she hadn't said it, Talia would have continued to look down on her and mock her. Now it remained to be seen who this Talia was. The littermate decided that she had to find information on Liana first. It really pissed her off that she was always pretending to be a kind girl. However, one of the entries said that she wanted to have tea with Renee and hoped to see Irving. But then she got really pissed off. Saint said she bought a new stove and baked a cake, and added that she knew it wasn't Renee who sent the murderer. Renee herself said she was busy, so she didn't have time to send it. In return, Saint only laughed. I don't understand what Irving saw in Liana. Saint looked very much like a fool. However, in the end, Renee couldn't refuse her meeting again, but she still should have done it secretly so that Alan and Irian wouldn't find out about it. She hoped no one heard their conversation. The temple was very strange when Romeo visited, and the priests showed still very strange back when they tried to touch her. That place was rotten through and through. Renee got angry at Liana, even though she shouldn't have done that. However, the saint kept saying she would stay in the temple, which even began to make Renee sick. Now she wished she could have talked her into it then. She had offered to tell Irian at least, but Liana had refused. The saint thought that the prince didn't love her, that he wouldn't go against the temple for her sake. And now Renee wondered what she was supposed to do now. The real Renee. After reading the diary, she closed it with resentment. She didn't understand what nonsense was going on in the pages. If everything said was true, this situation looked completely different. Lena also knew that Renee hadn't tried to kill her. Moreover, from Renee's notes, she realized that Liana and her were the only close friends she had. Early on, Renee had indeed been unreasonable and foolish, but now she wanted to believe that people were wrong to call her a villain. Perhaps now, the new Renee found herself in a new affair because among all those people, there was none who could help her. She could not have so much power to stop the evil surrounding them. Now she was even more puzzled as to where Liana could have gone. From now on, what she wanted most was someone to help her in her search. Someone who wouldn't immediately accuse her of the crime, but instead would step into the situation. The girl didn't understand who was really trying to hurt her friend Liana. Now she realized that if she continued to sit and rack her brains, there was no way she would be able to find the culprit. It was time to act, and even more so to act decisively. Renee accepted the fact that right now she had too little information about this new world. However, there were plenty of ways to get the information. The most important thing was that she knew where she should dig for it. Early now realized that she had reborn herself into the infamous villain, the wounded Marquis, the strongest warrior of the Ramdish Empire, Duke Morgan Marquis. Now she had to prepare herself for what lay ahead of her, which meant she needed to raise her reputation as high as possible to finally make sense of what was going on in the new world. Renee decided to show her journal to her brother Kian to make sure her sister's words were conductive. He read it in bewilderment. He kept wondering if the words that were on the pages were true. The girl realized that even if her brother would not believe her even after reading the diary, she was going to persuade him to help by force. However, it wasn't needed, as Kian immediately agreed after finishing reading. Kian said that he didn't fully believe even now, but he would try it. He added so that his sister wouldn't be fooled, He wasn't going to forgive her for tarnishing the family's reputation. His only goal was to get rid of that stigma. Renee still thanked her brother for at least trying to believe her, at least for now. If he'd believed sooner, though, a lot of things would have turned out differently. She didn't even need him to apologize to her. The girl said that she understood that it was hard for Kian to believe her completely, which was why she should have arranged a banquet where she could prove her words. However, her brother added that the banquet she was talking about could have been arranged by her father or brother alone. So Kian said that the only thing he could arrange was no more than the usual tea party. These words upset Renee, and she asked why her brother couldn't arrange more, being a member of the ducal family. It was as simple as that. In fact, the head of the family loved his brother more than his children. In fact, it wasn't even easy for even her brother to do so. Morgan didn't like unnecessary spending, so there had to be some special occasion or birthday for such an event. However, Renee had asked Kian for such a banquet that would be attended by the heads of the lands and influential aristocrats. She had already pictured in her head a picture of her dancing to the merry music of lutes and flutes. In other words, this event had to be attended by as many people as possible to see her. The girl realized that this was the only way she could at least somewhat calm the dirty rumors that were thinning about her. Now she was pondering how she could create the setting of a special event, under the pretext of which her father would agree to form a banquet. Perhaps she should have held an event in honor of receiving the highest level of swordmaster. In that case, her father would have gladly arranged a feast, a gathering of earls and dukes from all lands. Upon reflection, Renee called out to her brother, who didn't understand the reason. Humming, the girl asked if her brother was willing to admit that he slightly disliked his older brother. After all, if that was the case, Renee would be able to teach him a lesson. The girl could see that her brother had it written all over his face. Kian, trembling his hands, asked how Renee could do that. In response, the girl smiled, saying that there was one way she could resort to. After saying that, Kian felt a cold start to run down his back. It felt as if he had met the demon himself in front of him, who was trying hard to tempt him. Renee hovered over Kian. Was he ready to achieve a high level in swordsmanship and become a master who was willing to be recognized by the rulers of the lands, whose authority was high to the heavens? After a while, Renee managed to get the banquet publicized, where couples in love danced in pairs on the tiled floor to the music of Versailles. All these couples started chatting among themselves, revealing all the cards on the table, all their bad thoughts. The guests chattered among themselves that even if Morgan had gone bankrupt, he would have enough food to last him another 3 years. It seemed he really did have a lot of money that he didn't mind spending. One of the girls in the crowd replied that Morgan, of course, even had chickens pecking money instead of grain. However, all this talk was quickly interrupted when the couple of Renee and the Crown Prince came out to dance. The girls were smiling, saying that Renee and the Crown Prince had finally found each other. They didn't seem to know what rumors they had heard around the capitals. Or maybe they really thought they were the protagonists of the ball. And to be precise, the banquet was held to celebrate the achievements of Mr. Marquis Kian. The deputy commander of the court knights that Kian had defeated also had a high level of skill. And according to this very commander, who had witnessed their fight, it was all about pure aura. And Mr. Marquis gave some sort of incomprehensible answer that everyone was now whispering about. Kian, in response to talking about his accomplishments, said that everyone should have asked his sister how he had become so strong in wielding a sword in such a short period of time. That was his only question for such an answer. Most of the girls believed it. Only Mr. Kian's words could serve as grounds, but they were enough. Most believed it only because he himself had said it, and his reputation was quite high to consider his words. This was the reason why E had gathered so many guests. If only they could get stronger too, they were willing to dangle at Renee's feet. Renee danced with Irving, looking at the balcony where Cedric was standing. It looked like word had reached him too since he had come too. Of course, the views of all of this didn't make Cedric too happy. There was a look of sadness on his face that made it hard for him to live peacefully. Cedric was met by Kian on the balcony, who advised him to stop looking at Renee and Irving's couple like that. However, these words were followed by a question as to whether the mercenary king had any interest in the sister of the man who was the reason for the banquet. Noticing the confusion on Cedric's face after that question, Kian immediately justified himself by saying that it was just a joke. Sighing, the mercenary king congratulated Kian on receiving the title of a top-level swordmaster. The boy smiled in response and said that he had succeeded not only by his own strength, but also because of Reina. After saying that, Cedric's eyes went wide. He asked what exactly Kian meant. The guy was slightly surprised and asked if Renee really didn't say anything to Cedric. However, no sooner had the lad gotten the question than a crowd of people immediately appeared behind him, eager to have a conversation with the new swordmaster. Kian was immediately pushed by several guys who asked him for permission to talk to him. People started pushing and arguing amongst themselves who was the first to ask Mr. Marquis both of his successes. The crowd began to say that it was incredible that Kian had reached the highest level of swordmaster in such a short time. The guy tried to ask them to wait. However, with that, a ton more questions started flying about whether Renee was definitely onto the secret of how to achieve such mastery. Feeling Slava starting to bore him, Kian apologized and began to walk away quickly, saying that he wasn't used to this at all. However, the crowd rushed after him, not even trying to get behind him. Cedric remained calm. He couldn't get it out of his head that Kian had achieved everything because of his wound. Could it be that all those rumors were true? Even he had never heard of a way to become stronger in such a short time. He didn't understand what was in the mind of a strange girl like Renee. More than anything, Cedric wished that Renee would share her secrets with him as well. However, his musings were interrupted by Renee herself, who crept up behind him. She asked with a smile if he enjoyed the banquet. Cedric greeted the girl with a smile, saying that it seemed that rumors had spread very quickly. All the most famous aristocrats had gathered at the ballet, and all their gazes were turned only on Renee. And whatever she said, according to Cedric, she was sure to become the center of everyone's attention for many months to come. However, the girl's attention alone was not enough. She was burdened with many titles, such as Saint's Assassin, braggart, villainess, and possessor of valuable information. And in order to get rid of all of this towards herself, she needed to put on a grand show, turning to Cedric and saying that she intended to use all of this to her advantage. After all, it was the only one that would allow her to shock everyone at once and fix her reputation. The boy was greatly surprised by this, but his question was interrupted by Irving, who came up behind him, hugging Renee. Irving smiled and said that everyone was just asking where his beautiful companion and partner had gone. Renee frowned and told the prince to stop talking nonsense. Cedric pressed his lips together, but still managed to squeeze out a smile, recalling her bursting scar. He told Renee that she could go, and he would stay where he was and wait for her to continue the conversation. Renee nodded and thanked the guy, saying she would be back soon. Renee walked behind her hand with the prince, telling him to take his hand off her talia. But the prince said it was all for the plan, and the girl successfully responded to the guy to hurry up and come to his senses before she broke all his fingers. Cedric, after Renee's words for him to believe in his glory and live his life doing what he didn't like to those around him, felt lighter on his soul. Now, however, things were confusing again for him. After all, he had never regretted giving up the title before. However, now he doubts, watching his mentor dancing hand in hand with the prince. This was something he definitely did not want to see. The girl stood with the prince by the hand on the stage. She held champagne in her hands and thanked everyone for coming to tonight's event. Renee offered to raise all the glasses to Kian, who brought glory to her lineage of Marquis. However, amidst all the noise, she felt the taunts of the visiting guests who had come to see her because of idle curiosity. In response, she smiled to herself, wondering how long they could have lasted. Ron said that she would now like to answer the question that had everyone worried. She confirmed all those rumors, that she was the one who helped Kian Marquis become stronger. These words stirred up the gathered people. In that case, they asked the girl to tell more details, but she was not going to do so, asking, why on earth would she tell everyone about her secrets? Was it possible to reveal all her secrets to everyone? The less people knew about her abilities, the more valuable they were. Especially according to Kian, in this world, the highest level of swordmaster was something incredible, as if a commoner turned out to be an aristocrat. Renee was talking to Kian one afternoon when he told her that the moment Cedric gave up the title, there was immediate talk among the nobles about it. Therefore, such valuable information could not be told by a girl for nothing. People agreed that if it was true, it was impossible to divulge their secrets to Renee. However, in another way, they couldn't believe the girl's words that she was the one involved in Kian's elevation in sword-wielding. Renee said that she had no hidden skills that could help Kian, but there were many who could simply pay to know her secret. A voice was heard from the crowd that only wanted to know Renee's hidden powers. The owner of the voice was the person the girl needed. The mysterious person was Talia, the daughter of Count Kypros. Renee didn't think Talia would decide to come out of hiding and reveal herself. She was the person who regularly appeared in Renee's diary. Moreover, not everything was written there. One afternoon, besides Cedric came up with some sort of sheet in his hand. He said that he thought Renee should have looked at it. On that very sheet was the proof that Talia was the girl who had made Renee a villain. Renee raised an eyebrow and asked Talia what exactly she meant by saying those words. The red-haired girl replied that she didn't see Renee as wanting to share her secret at all. Talia asked what if she said in front of everyone that Renee Marquis was the girl who had been trying to kill Saint all along. However, Renee reminded her that she was now and was in the Marquis family mansion, where she was trying to tarnish that family's reputation. Until now, Renee had only endured humiliation and insult. Now she wanted to get rid of it all by harassing Talia. However, the red-haired girl did not calm down. She said that she wasn't at all surprised that Renee was suddenly concerned about the family's reputation. Talia didn't stop talking, saying that Renee, who was unanimously called the disgrace of the Marquis family by everyone, was probably not willing to let even a fraction of truth out of her mouth. However, Renee was not like that at all. The girl was willing to fight Talia in an argument. Renee said that Talia's words made sense. Truth was a rather abstract concept and could become a lie depending on the listener. The girl smiled, saying that she wasn't going to give away all her secrets for free. Otherwise, the name wasn't at all interesting to share with other people close by. And after saying that, Talia finally realized that something was wrong here. Some of the men standing behind Talia emotionally asked Renee, what exactly was the truth that mattered? Talia said that if it was the only truth she liked, it had to be something unusual and rare. She didn't realize if Renee Marquis had been so confident before. She didn't like the words she had spoken, especially since they were far from the truth. It was as if she had become a different person. All the guests began to chatter amongst themselves, creating a buzz in the room. They began to argue with each other about Talia and Renee's relationship. Finally, all this noise was interrupted by Irving himself, not wanting to hear it. The prince said that he did not want to interfere in the event arranged by Morgan Marquis, but after listening to all this talk, it seemed to him very rude. And after these words, he stared resentfully at Talia. Talia lowered her eyes and apologized, saying she didn't mean to hurt Irving's feelings. However, she asked if Prince Renee himself had been suspicious. She added that she herself was the kind of person who was very fond of Saint Liana. It was hard for her to stay calm seeing how Renee was deceiving people again. Italia said with obvious emotion that it was Ren who decided to kill Saint because she was Irving's fiancée. Suddenly, that suicide note pointing out the guilt of Ren and the prince was another lie by Lady Marquis. Several people from behind the crowd agreed, saying that no matter how it was, Renee's past was going nowhere. It was quite possible that this secret that the girl was now hiding was also a deception. Renee looked at all of this with calm eyes. The gathered crowd only wanted to know the way to become stronger and changed their minds from a few words. Although it was an extra confirmation of Renee's bad reputation, Irving raised his hand, saying that he was no longer willing to listen to all this filth. He said that the body that was recently discovered was not Liana's. It was all a setup. Irving hadn't originally planned to reveal his entire plan here, but to calm the false rumors about him and Renee, he asked those gathered to take his words to heart. And that immediately made people question whether the prince was really claiming that everything was set up by someone else's hands. Irving stated that the court enchanter had examined the corpse, which had black hair when he was alive, and as everyone knew, Liana had light brown hair. The suicide note had been fabricated to harm Renee and the prince, using someone who had gone missing. And now no one knew who could have done such a thing. Rain said that unfortunately, they hadn't found the real culprit yet, but if he had even gone to the extent of burning an innocent person to set such a thing up, he was most likely connected to Saint Liana's kidnapping. The crowd got a little revolted, asking what this was all set up for, since Saint Liana was loved by everyone. Renee replied that she didn't know the reasons. They were only known to the one who tried to kill her. As soon as Talia wanted to interject, she was immediately reprimanded by Renee, addressing her by saying that she was the one who had sent the assassins to Liana. In fact, the number of people in charge of Saint was quite large, and Talia Kypros was among them. She and the Saint were both Earl's daughters, but only Liana had the blessing of the gods, and Talia was left behind. Among her peers, Talia was renowned for her rare magical abilities, lineage and ability, wealth and fame, lover and friend. Talia had it all, so it's no wonder she was always the object of interest to those around her. But all of Talia's advantages vanished in an instant with the appearance of the Saint guarding the Empire. And of course, Lady Kypros was enraged by this. Talia hated Liana, who had more outstanding qualities than her, and her humble character was perceived as arrogance. In Talia's eyes, the Saint's behavior was empty and unnecessary, and the people did nothing but praise the Saint for every little thing. Soon it was announced that the Saint was engaged to the princes, and then everything inside Talia just turned upside down with anger. Talia was literally smashing everything around, not understanding what was good in this hypocrite Liana. Further was ready to do something against Saint, but perfectly understood her position. Next was tearing the hair on her head, realizing what would happen to her if she touched the prince's fiancé. However, everything pissed her off that she had no intention of putting her hands down. And then, by coincidence, Talia heard rumors about Renee Marquis. Renee was the only daughter of the Duke who had the audacity to bully the prince's fiancée, the Saint herself. Talia didn't understand how anyone could be so cruel and unreasonable, and to Talia, Renee was the perfect villain and perfection. However, Renee had actually been a coward who pretended to be strong before the main events. And now Talia didn't understand how some silly damsel had the audacity to build such an important persona. Talia felt betrayed, and as a result decided to act in her own way. She began to set up meetings, poison food, put poisons in gifts, and blame it all on Renee, who she saw as an easy target for framing. Talia mocked the hated Leon, and at the same time decided to deal with the stupid and weak Renee. Thus, she killed 2 hares with 1 stone. However, as of late, things had changed. Talia furrowed her eyebrows and said that the prince's words were an extremely ridiculous statement. She didn't understand how anyone could say such a thing without any proof. But Renee replied that there was proof. However, she had them, and others had them. After those words, Talia's confusion began to show even more. In addition, new feelings arose within her after earlier asking if Talia remembered the price of Renee's secret of how one could obtain the highest level of swordmaster. However, Talia's confusion was quickly changed by her eyes glowing with joy. She felt delight at the resistance of an opponent she had underestimated, and also the power that banish all boredom was the manifestation of meeting an equal. Renee did not realize what was the matter. She was confused by the admiring look in Talia's eyes, who now seemed a pervert rather than a master of intrigue. Irving watched Renee and Talia's altercation. He shifted his gaze from one girl to the other, realizing how much Renee was attacking her opponent. He was accepting the fact that the girl who had been running after him for ages had changed a lot. Now, she needed his help. When Irving had first decided to help Rena, he had no idea she would be so great at it. A few days ago, he thought back to a moment in the woods outside the capital. Then Renee spoke as she talked about the news of the suicide note that had spread throughout the empire. She was telling Irving that he had to help her now, in which case she would do anything to make him emperor. From that day on, he realized that Renee had become much wiser, but now he couldn't trust her. To prove her strength, Renee decided to swing with all her might and hit the air, causing the trees standing in a row to fall to the ground. At that moment, he was completely confused and stopped realizing who the girl standing in front of him really was. Irving, though extremely surprised, said that he could get rid of the accusation himself, and Renee turned out to be an extremely unreliable person for him to cooperate with. However, once the prince lost the argument, he could not do anything about it. Yes, and Renee showed a lot. So this time he decided to believe the girl and agree to cooperate. Plus, Irving knew that Renee and his fiancée Leanne were friends. On this, he already asked how he found out about it, whether the saint herself had told him about it personally. The lad replied that he had found it out through a letter I had found in a small safe. Irving said that this letter Liana was going to send to Renee, but never got around to it because it was missing. No one realized how valuable this letter must have been to her since she hid it in the safe. Irving said that Liana had always tried to protect Renee, which seemed rather strange to him. But now he was convinced of the friendship between the girls and began to understand the situation. In response to these words, Early frowned, saying that despite this, Prince still allowed himself to doubt her. Prince stated that Renee should have shown herself brighter, but instead tried to kill Liana. In addition, Irving knew that the girl was talking behind Saint's back. The girl said that it was hard for her to trust Irving then, too, since he was suspected of murder and he hid the witnesses. For that reason, Irving said he would try to trust Renee from now on. The girl said, looking at Irving's attitude toward her, she became even more doubtful. She offered to prove to the prince that he could be trusted, and in that case, she would begin to believe in their real cooperation. Irving spread his hands, not knowing how he could prove his loyalty to Renee. The girl replied that he had to give her something as proof. The prince replied that he had something in mind, but at the moment, he couldn't give it to her. The prince lowered his eyes and suggested that the girl should do otherwise. He said that he would cooperate with Renee, and when he could trust her, then he would give her proof of it. However, he believed the girl only because of Liana, with whom she had a friendly relationship. In turn, Renee was also going to do everything to make the prince trust her. So she thanked Irving and offered to summarize. She promised that she would help the prince to take the throne, and he would help her in return. And when he starts to trust more, would give her something as proof of trust. Renee held out her hand forward for the prince to please her in making the pact. Irvinka looked at it for a long moment, but finally accepted it, consummating the deal. At this point, Renee said that she realized that from Talia's mouth, most of the time it was only the bed that lasted. So the girl had to bring proof of the attempted murder of Saint. It could have been someone other than Talia. If she had any information afterwards that someone had tried to kill Liana, she should put it to the Duchess. However, Renee added that it had to be reliable information. Lying in order to find out her secret she could not forgive. For surely there would be those who had heard something somewhere. Renee realized that if people began to suspect each other, surely someone would confess that they had evidence. Such was human nature. Talia stated that she didn't know what Renee was talking about. After all, she had stated that she had personally sent the killer. Had she forgotten that while she was beginning to unravel her web to whitewash her honor? Renee sighed. She finally realized what Talia was up to. The girl glanced at the prince, who in turn and couldn't take his eyes off her. The Duchess realized that there was no other way out in this situation, so she would have to read one of her spells. Renee recited a spell to herself, which in the books was called the Mask of Asmodeus. Finally, the girl admitted that she said such words, but only because Talia threatened her. And after these words, Renee in public grabbed the prince's hand and began to shed tears bitterly. At first, such words greatly enraged Talia, but then she quickly pulled herself together. She didn't understand how the Count's daughter could threaten this line of the Duke, yet Morgan Marquis himself. Renee bowed her head and said that it was entirely possible, as Talia knew Lady Marquis's weakest points. She asked if she thought such behavior was rather foolish. Irving decided to play along as well. He took the earlier shoulder and glared at Talia, saying that not only was she using her engagement to Liana as an excuse, but she was also blackmailing Renee because he loved her. Seeing the bewilderment on Talia's face and in the rest of the people's, Renee smiled a little, accepting the fact that Irving was pretty good at faking it. Anyway, this whole scene had been long ago devised between them in one of the rooms before the banquet began. Irving had said shortly before the feast that he would be glad to help Renee off the hook, but he didn't see why he had to pretend to be in love with her. Renee did not like the idea herself, but she saw no other way to justify herself. The prince told the girl that she must have known that the news was meant to hurt her, but she had resorted to such a means anyway. Their secret liaison in the end was only meant to strengthen the opinion of those around them that they were the indirect cause of Liana. Renee was well aware of this, but realized that there was nothing she could do about it. It was impossible to justify herself in the usual way in this situation. Now Renee's reputation was badly damaged. The aristocrats, who were the ultimate benefactors of power, should be the most affected by the method of obtaining the highest level of swordmaster, so the people who were worried about the disappearance of the saint should have found another approach. For example, finding a new villainess who could be the real killer. The prince agreed with this opinion, but involving third parties in the scandal could be very risky. He saw no point in making up something that wasn't there. Renee waved her hands and said that she thought the prince didn't quite understand the whole situation. Of course, it was risky if she was the only one with feelings for the prince, but there had already been rumors because of the note that said arranged marriage. Renee was told that the courtiers saw Irving's attitude towards her, so they accepted these rumors laid. However, the common people did not know the whole situation. If the two of them couldn't find Liana right now, in that case, the two of them should have blamed it on the other person to at least avert suspicion a little. Renee knew very well that if false rumors were used, they could become an effective weapon. And once their immoral relationship became true, the rumors about Talia would also become true. Therefore, Renee and Irving should become the lovers that Talia used to change the structure of society. Scandals always spread at lightning speed, whether among commoners or aristocrats, and at the same time, they could get information by promising to tell a way to increase their skill level. Renee would be disgusted to play the crush on the prince, but it was better than doing nothing and not finding Liana. Now Talia was making excuses and saying that it was the other way around. As far as she knew, only Renee had feelings for the prince. But the prince bowed his head and said that was the case before his engagement. However, he was too busy with the affairs of the empire and did not recognize true love. His choice seemed right to him then. The prince strained all his acting skills and squeezed out some tears, saying that he too was human and had a feeling. He had only realized his attitude towards Renee after he had been around the other woman. Now, no one would be able to shake his heart, for it belonged to one or the Duchess of Marquis. However, the prince missed the moment, and when he still dared to confess, Renee's feelings were already far from him. By his choice, Renee tried to keep the trust of the Liana who was engaged to him, and for a long time they suffered in silence, feeling for each other. This is what the prince said, trying to make everyone believe in the truth of his words. Irving, surprisingly, was not going to get out of character. He kept saying that he was the only one who had not remained faithful. Everything that happened between him and Renee was his fault, and his beloved, his true beloved, was not to blame for anything. Even the native recognized that if Irving had been born in the past, he would have been a very good actor. However, it seemed to her, even to herself for a second, that his words were something more than mere acting. To be honest, Renee recognized that the script she had written was lowbrow, but people believed in it because Irving's acting was very convincing. Cedric was watching the whole thing from afar. Understandably, he knew nothing about the play and was extremely disappointed by Ren and Irving's words. Perhaps he felt jealousy, perhaps hatred, but Irving wasn't going to end it. He was saying that he no longer wished to see his beloved unfairly accused. He said that if one man's love for another was a sin, he was going to sin again. Renee finally exhaled. The lines she had written for Irving were finally over. Now she needed to point the arrows at her waist again, so that the gathered people would believe her guilty for the missing or the death of Saint Liana. But suddenly, to Renee's great surprise, she heard lines that should not have been in the script. The prince, with a glassy stare, said that he knew now was the worst possible moment, but he could wait no longer. Irving took the girl's slender hand, directing his piercing gaze at her. Renee didn't understand what the prince was about to do, but she clearly didn't like it. Irving pulled a ring out of a hidden pocket of his tailcoat and placed it gently, with 2 fingers, on Renee's ring finger. He said he knew it was too late now, but he only wondered if his girlfriend would give him another chance. Being horribly shocked, Renee directed her worried gaze at Irving, and with trembling lips quietly said that she agreed to his proposal. Toward evening, when all the guests had gone, Renee sat in a corner with a bottle in her hand. She did not understand why Irving had decided to make such a rash move. Everything had been going well until he proposed to her. Renee began to think now that she might be able to get something out of the Holy Vine prayer book she had found in her tent. Perhaps she would be able to find some hidden information or her designs. Footsteps were heard behind Renee. Cedric approached her, asking if he could address her. Renee hoped the impending conversation wouldn't last long as she wasn't in the mood. But the guy's reply was that he only wanted to just ask something and then leave as soon as the girl would answer. Cedric asked the girl why she didn't share her plans with him. Because the day she took him as her apprentice, he said he was ready, but everything like her. He was the one who found out what atrocities Talia Kypros was committing. If she had informed the society earlier, she wouldn't have had to ask for the prince's help. But instead, Renee took such a daring step. The boy didn't understand the reason for it. Renee knew and understood that and needed Cedric. That's why she took him as her apprentice. But she didn't think he would ask about what happened himself. She asked him if he thought people would believe she would publicize it. In this situation, it was necessary to put on a show. The girl said that she would rather handle the situation herself than sit around and wait for Cedric to do it for her. Especially since the evidence Cedric had found would later become the means by which people would judge whether they were being told the truth or not. Therefore, the boy shouldn't have been upset. To begin with, Renee was Cedric's teacher, so she had to handle her own affairs. She couldn't put all her troubles on her only student. Cedric felt a little embarrassed. His cheeks turned pink. He realized the reason why Renee had taken such a brave step with the prince. Renee realized that Cedric was most worried about her relationship with Irving. The boy in turn was surprised that they were already calling each other by name. Cedric shivered even more. He recalled the girl's words when she said that she wouldn't love anyone else. And the girl confirmed it, saying that they had a fake love. Such a relationship as they had was beneficial to them. Besides, Cedric knew it very well himself. Cedric said that Renee could have told him about it from the beginning, since he was her student. The girl justified herself by saying that she herself did not know that Irving would suddenly make a confession. She made a pact with him that she would tell the sympathy they had felt for each other for a long time. The lad was somewhat comforted by these words. Renee softened the situation even more. I said that it was impossible to do it impulsively. After all, it would look strange. After these words, Cedric let go of the look and said that he would try to get used to being around Renee. Cedric no longer wanted to feel the helplessness that he felt at the banquet. He would want Renee to use him whenever she needed help. He wanted to become a man who was a match for her, and in that case she would be able to trust him a little more. The next day, Cedric stood in the prince's office, asking him to give him the title he had long ago given up. Irving kept reminding him that the lad had refused it himself, but he insisted that if the prince refused him, he would still get it by asking for it in another empire. Irving circled Cedric next to him, saying that he had changed quite a bit, assuming it was all Renee's influence. The prince finally relented and said that he couldn't give the title of Master of the Sword to another state, so he would personally give it to Cedric. However, Cedric had already refused once and declared that he would not obey anyone. Therefore, he will now have to fulfill one of Irving's assignments. It was reported to him that a strange movement had been seen in the northern borders. He would need to find out what was going on there. Cedric was holding a scroll that had all the detailed information about the movements in the northern borders. The number of monsters was increasing at a great rate, and hunger and infection was spreading in the surrounding areas. Cedric said that usually the sudden appearance of monsters, famine, and infection were usually related to dark magic. And that was the temple's problem, which was supposed to be about that, winding up. But the principal said that the temple people were very cowardly, and he'd like Cedric to go there with them and find out what was wrong. The lad put the sheet on the table and asked the prince if he would definitely give him the promised title when he completed the specified task. And the prince proudly answered this positively. Cedric said he would come out as soon as everything was ready for his departure. Irving supported this idea, saying that the cold winter was approaching, which could greatly affect the fulfillment of this mission. Just as the lad was about to leave, he was interrupted by the prince. He asked, did Renee mean so much to him that he had expressed a desire for a title he had already given up once? Cedric turned around and asked in return what answer Irving was hoping for. He replied that honesty was the most important thing to him. Cedric knew that Liana meant a great deal to Irving. However, he wondered what Renee meant to him. How dare he speculate on the meaning of this man, knowing absolutely nothing about him? Now, however, he was willing to do much, very much, for her sake. In answer to Irving's question, Cedric said he did not know the truth. However, Renee meant much more to him than she did to the prince. The prince smiled in response, realizing that Cedric was becoming as cocky as Renee herself. In truth, Liana and Irving were not truly in love with each other. Saint and Renee, on the other hand, were friends. Renee herself turned out not to be the villain as expected, but the victim. But there was something unexpected, namely that Liana and Renee were being announced as the main characters of the story. There was something else that kept Renee on her toes. Cedric had appeared at the very beginning of her journey, so she considered him a significant person. However, his name did not appear anywhere in the book, and to the girl, it seemed impossible. With such looks, with such talents, he had to be mentioned at least somewhere. Naturally, before the main events, Renee had never been to the slums where she would have met Cedric. Perhaps he must have appeared later, although if he was not mentioned anywhere, it meant that he was not a significant character. There was a knock at the door, a man who was very light-headed. Earlier, frowning her eyebrows, asked Cedric what he needed. Here came one of the reasons why she had a headache. Cedric, hearing the displeasure in the girl's voice, assumed that he had not come at the most opportune time. But Renee comforted him that she was just tired. The boy walked through the door and saw the girl boldly drinking bourbon from a bottle. Cedric had come to report to Renee about the Kypros clan. The girl was surprised that the judgment had already come out faster than she thought. Cedric replied that there had been no trial because the men from the temple had intervened. It was because Talia Kypros had indeed tried to kill the saint. And that fact infuriated Renee as soon as she realized that the men from the temple had left Liana all alone at a dangerous moment, and now they had come and demanded something. But it turned out that it was the saint's request. She had personally said she was fine and didn't need to punish anyone for not having custody of her. That's what the people from the temple had told Cedric. Renee thought for a second. If Liana had wished to punish the perpetrator, Renee would have been put in jail. But they were friends, so that wouldn't have happened. Everything didn't fit together. Cedric noticed how thoughtful everything was anyway. He asked her if she was feeling all right. The girl nodded her head and said she was fine. She wanted to know more about what exactly the temple had done in this situation. Cedric began to tell her that the temple servants were very cunning. They were able to gain an advantage for themselves by intervening in this case and overturning the courts. They were now able to illuminate Count and Countess Kypros, who were the main followers of the princess, while the temple itself supported the prince. The temple servants told everyone that they had kept the assassination attempt on the saint a secret at the request of the saint herself, and also showed everyone their power by intervening in the trial of the aristocrats and requesting their execution. Rane said that as it was, the ministers were the truest of wolves in sheep's clothing. That's why she disliked those who worshipped God so much. Said she found out what convent Liana had been sent to, just in case. Renee smiled and sipped Cedric a glass of bourbon as a thank you. Cedric looked at the full glass, asking if the girl was really okay. He added that the temple had done it their way and hadn't even apologized. Renee, on the other hand, replied, what could she do? There was a matter that was already settled. To be honest, the urn had no right to punish Talia. After all, the apology should have been made not to her, but to the real Renee, whom the urn had mocked and tried to defame in every possible way. Cedric called out to the girl and said that it seemed that he would not be able to approach her for a while. Namely, because he had a lot of things to do. He specified that there were strange phenomena on the northern borders, and he had to go there to check. The girl wanted to know the details. The guy answered her that more traces of dark magic were detected, which sometimes manifested. But this time there was something distinctive. Cedric said that more witnesses who saw the image of the tower. And those words snapped Renee out of her thoughts. She realized what kind of tower they were talking about, and what risk could await everyone living in this world. She could not allow Cedric to take such a huge risk alone. Renee, gritting her teeth, asked what the tower Cedric was talking about looked like. The boy tried to comfort her, saying that it was nothing to worry about. However, the girl did not calm down. She grabbed the boy by the shoulder, demanding that he quickly give her a description of the building. And the boy immediately told her that he had only heard that it was a black tall tower. So tall that you couldn't see the top. The girl took the boy by the shoulders with both hands. She looked him straight in the eyes and told him that she too had to go to that tower right now.